Welcome to part 2, A History of Evil. Now that we have a lot of context and a strong biblical foundation, it's time to begin this epic journey through history. We want to prove the Bible true, and we want to also arm ourselves for the future that is coming. That is the goal of this message. We're going to take a very broad but detailed look through history, and of course all of this is to confirm everything we just established through the scriptures. The Bible presents you with one enemy, which is the devil. And of course, his fruits are many, but they all amount to counterfeit faith. The same lie that he told humanity, and that he also repeated to the fallen angels to become their own gods, the devil has told that same lie to himself, that he is God. And of course, throughout history, it's always been the devil trying to be God, to be worshipped as God, and to be the counterfeit savior. The mystery religion began in the Garden of Eden with the forbidden fruit. Again, if you want some great edification on that, watch my Serpent Seed series. But seeing it go through time is important. It's important to see how the mystery religion went through these different packages to understand what Revelation 17 is talking about, and of course the spiritual significance of the Synagogue of Satan. So in this section, we're going to review a very broad amount of history. We're going to do a lot of content in this particular section. And it's going to go from ancient times all the way to the Jesuits in the 1500s. You'll see just exactly how Satan basically has integrated the mystery religion through all these different empires and ultimately into the Roman Catholic Church, just as the Bible tells you. Now, the first age is from the Garden of Eden to basically the flood, which is called the antediluvian era. Antediluvian. Ante before, diluvian is his flood. The age was probably extremely advanced. Nephilim were roaming the earth. They were being worshipped as demigods. Very likely there was a one world order, very advanced architecture, a lot of occult knowledge. It was a one world system. That's the system that the devil has been trying to return back to, and which he will be allowed to return to before the very end, before the next judgment. It was definitely in total rebellion, and mankind became totally corrupt. Totally corrupt. Every thought of his heart was only evil continually. So it gives you the idea of how quickly mankind was completely corrupted by sin and pride and the mystery religion. God, of course, judged that age, but the information persisted after the flood. We see also that Nephilim came after the flood as well. Now, it's not clear if these Nephilim were survivors of some kind, if they went underground, if they're results of additional rebellions. Who knows? I go into some ideas in my Nephilim episode, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't. And this is one of the examples of getting sidetracked with details that don't really matter. It doesn't matter. We know that there were giants even after the flood, and what those giants represent, like in my article on David and Goliath, how Goliath pictures... I don't know if it's out yet. It might be out. I don't remember when I scheduled it as of the time of this video, but I do have a great audio and track scheduled for David and Goliath, and how Goliath and David picture physically, they were real people, but they picture physically the battle between these two forces. And of course, the battle's already been won, but the point is there's a very interesting spiritual picture there through the Nephilim. Either way, the world was judged, but Satan's mystery religion was not eliminated. The information that was there from Garden of Eden persisted through the judgment. And then, of course, the next age you have is kind of what I call ancient paganism, which is from, I would say the Tower of Babel up until Jesus' time and with the early church. So the first thing that happens after the flood is that people try to build a tower reaching up to heaven. Now, there's a lot of theories on this. I do believe it was a real structure. There's some very wild theories about it, and there's some very practical theories about it. I am not either way. I think that there was definitely a lot of occult things involved. I think that it was probably, an actual building where they had, sacrifices and they were trying to do all their idolatrous things. It doesn't really matter. The point is that the person who conscripted this tower was Nimrod, and Nimrod is tied to the mystery religion because he's the first person, the first God king after the flood, to basically do all these things and to try to unify the world into one system again. Immediately after, you're looking at, 200-300 years after the flood. People are repopulating the earth, and they're back at it again with a new world order and everything else. Nimrod is the first god king that Satan uses after the flood. So his story is very significant because the mythology surrounding Nimrod set a precedent for sun worship and occult mystery schools for the rest of history, even until the modern age. Now, I want to read you something from a place called Christian Walks. They've adapted a book. I don't remember what the name of this book is, but they've adapted parts of the book. I think, let's see, this is a quote from The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop. Anyway, this section is called Baptized Paganism. I've talked about it in my Sabbath series, but we're going to just read a little bit about the origin of sun worship. We read in the Bible about Nimrod, the man who had something to do with the beginning of pagan sun worship. We read about him in Genesis 10, verses 8 through 10. And Cush begat Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty hunter before the Lord, whereas it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, or Babylon. In another translation of the Bible called the Targum, we read this: Nimrod became a mighty man of sin, a murderer of innocent men, and a rebel before the Lord. Nimrod, one of the great grandsons of Noah, is accredited with being the originator of sun worship. Nimrod was a great leader, and he was the first empire builder. He was the founder of Babylon. According to history, his wife Semiramis was a very great and wicked queen. And through Semiramis, we find the devil trying to counterfeit God's great and wonderful plan of salvation. She was the first deified queen of Babylon, and Nimrod was the first deified king. When Nimrod died, the people mourned. They claimed he was a god. Semiramis, in order to elevate her own position, told the people Nimrod was indeed the sun god and that his spirit was still living in the sun. They were still worshipping Nimrod, whose spirit was supposed to be dwelling in the sun. She was already the queen of Babylon, in which there had been built a tower to reach unto heaven. Then, to elevate her own position, she said to the people that she was the queen of heaven, and that her spirit was that of the moon, and when she died, she would dwell in the moon, even as Nimrod was already in the sun. Satan was laying the foundation for every system of falsehood and error that the world has ever known. They took the truth of God and perverted it, changed it into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature, Satan, more than the Creator. Romans 1:25. Here's the truth that should be deeply impressed upon our minds. Paganism is devil worship. Hear the word of God. Let us never forget that this system of religion, while professing to be the true religion, is actually devil worship. Synagogue of Satan. It professes and claims to be the truth of God. In reality, it is Satan's masterpiece, the mystery of iniquity. A pagan holiday. Every year when the cold season began, the people believed that their sun god was leaving them. They came to learn that this lowest dip on the horizon about December 21st was followed by his gradual return until in midsummer he was nearly overhead at the noonday. It was on the 25th of December that they began to notice this gradual return of the sun god. This day they called the birth of the sun. Thus the winter solstice came to be regarded as a time of great importance. At the festival inaugurated, there was feasting and merriment in honor of the return of the all-powerful sun god. It was this belief in the annual journey of their god that Elijah alluded to in his conflict with the priests of Baal, the Syro-Phoenician sun god. If he is a god, quote now, he is on a journey, or peradventure sleepeth and must be awakened. 1 Kings 18:27. After the death of Nimrod, Semiramis never married again. Being the queen of heaven, how could she marry an ordinary man? But some years later she gave birth to a son. His name was Tammuz. He was born on the 25th of December. There was wild rejoicing in the nation over which Semiramis was queen. She told the people that the spirit of the sun, her husband Nimrod, was the father of Tammuz. Thus, through the sin of this queen, Satan was laying another stone in the foundation of the false system, which would counterfeit the miraculous birth of Jesus. Tammuz was regarded as a miracle child of Semiramis. Tammuz was hailed as the son of the sun. He was idolized and worshipped. Really quick pause. Remember that Satan was in the garden when the gospel was revealed. So from the moment that he was basically announced this gospel, he was already scheming as to how to counterfeit this system. That's why the mystery religion inherently is also the counterfeit. Do you understand? Moving on. The first letter of his name became in time the symbol of sun worship. Human sacrifices to the sun god were offered on this initial letter made of wood known as the cross, a T-shaped cross. Now, really quick pause. This is a capital T. A lot of people mistake this history and say that, the cross is a pagan symbol and so on and so forth. I have a whole episode on that with my, was Jesus was crucified on a cross or a stake? Mostly addressing Jehovah's Witnesses claims, but there's people who believe that the cross is a pagan symbol. It's not. There's a solar cross, which is equidistant lines, like basically the Templar cross, which is still in use today. They used to put these little solar crosses on cakes that they would bake for Baal. And there's the actual Christian cross, which just resembles a normal cross that Jesus was crucified on, a lowercase t cross. There's one that's vertical, and you can tell it's vertical because it's the longer one that's going into the ground. And there's one that's horizontal that's shorter. And I go into detail as to why that's not a pagan symbol. But anyway, just so you don't get snared by that. His birthday, December 25th, was honored more and more. One historian writing of the time of Rome says, the 25th of December, the day that was observed at Rome as the day when the victorious God reappeared on the earth, was held at the Natali Invicti Solis, the birthday of the unconquered sun. The Yule log is the dead stock of Nimrod, deified as the sun god, but cut down by his enemies. The Christmas tree is Nimrod Redivus, the slain god come to life again. The Two Babylons by Hyssop, page 98. To further honor this sun god, the first day of the week was dedicated to the sun. It became known as Sun's Day and later called Sunday. To honor Semiramis, the goddess of the moon, they set aside the first full moon after the vernal equinox. Remembering that Tammuz was born on December 25th, at once is manifested the relationship between the 2 days. Between the 25th of March and the 25th of December, there are exactly 9 months. Thus, the 25th of March came to be honored as the day when this false Messiah, the son of the sun god, was conceived. Now, with that in mind, let's consider this statement from a book giving the different festival days recognized by the Papal Church. Quote, the Virgin, March 25th, commemorates the coming of the angel Gabriel to Mary to announce that she is to be the mother of God. Think of it, dear friends. Satan worked many years before the conception of the birth of the true Messiah, Jesus, to counterfeit through the sun worship his miraculous conception at birth, which, by the way, another quick pause. They've inverted this because they say that Jesus was conceived basically March 25th, which of course is nonsense. Jesus was born September 11th, according to certain calculations using the book of Revelation, chapter 12. And you can look into that yourself. There's some very good evidence about that. But nevertheless, he was born in the fall. And that means that he was conceived around December 8th, approximately. What happens in the Catholic calendar on December 8th? It's the feast of the Immaculate Conception of Mary. Do you see how they inverted the truth? Mary becomes the one that's immaculately conceived, and when you're supposed to be, not that God wanted you to celebrate all these things, but if you were going to celebrate Jesus' conception, it would be around December, early December, because he was born in September. And they made that about Mary instead, and they made, the sun god's conception about Mary's conception, and then Christmas about, of course, the false sun god being born. So anyway, moving on. While yet a young man, Tammuz, a hunter like his supposed father, was killed by a wild boar. There was a great weeping and mourning through the entire kingdom, and the 4th day before the full moon, following the vernal equinox, was set apart as a time of weeping for Tammuz. We read about this very thing in the Bible. Perhaps some of you never knew that the Bible mentions this. Quote, he then said to me, Son of man, do you see what the elders of the house of Israel are committing in the dark, each man in the room of his carved images? For they say, the Lord does not see us, the Lord has forsaken the land. And he said to me, yet you will see still greater abominations which are they committing. Then he brought me to the entrance of the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north. And behold, women were sitting there weeping for Tammuz. Remember, the Israelites were worshiping, they were claiming to be God worshippers, but yet they're engaging in this sun worship system. The Bible tells you. And he said to me, do you see this, Son of man? Yet you will see still greater abominations than these. Then he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the entrance to the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs to the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east. Just like they still do today through the Catholic churches, Orthodox churches, Muslims. And they were prostrating themselves eastward toward the sun. And he said to me, do you see this, Son of man? Is it too light of a thing for the house of Judah to commit these abominations which they have committed here? that they have filled the land with violence and provoked me repeatedly. For behold, they are putting the twig to their nose. Therefore I indeed shall deal in wrath. My eye will have no pity, nor shall I spare. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, yet I shall not listen to them. Then he cried out in my hearing with a loud voice, saying, Draw near, O executioners of the city, each with his destroying weapon in his hand. Ezekiel 8. God's people were constantly coming in contact with paganism, which, remember, is devil worship, which has nothing more less than sun worship. They were constantly being tempted to follow the religions of the pagans instead of the Bible. Satan succeeded many times in leading God's people into sin and pagan sun worship. The prophet was shown greater and still greater abominations. He was shown the people turning their backs on the temple of God and worshiping the sun towards the east. They also worshiped the moon, goddess Semiramis, and the queen of heaven. Let's read Jeremiah 7, 1 through 18. Really quick pause. The reason they were turning their backs to the temple of the Lord is because the temple wasn't facing east. You get it? It was facing the other way. So the fact that the Catholic Church makes all its churches faced eastward and the Orthodox Church, same thing, what does that tell you? This is Jeremiah 7, 1 through 18. Therefore pray not thou for this people, neither lift up a cry, nor pray for them, neither make intercession to me, for I will not hear thee. Seest thou not what they do in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? The children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women kneaded their dough to make cakes for the queen of heaven. These are those little cakes that they would put the solar crosses on, and to pour out drink offerings to other gods that they may provoke me to anger. These cakes were round, and on them was a cut cross in honor of the sun god, and they were offered to the queen of heaven. Queen of heaven, folks. There's only one queen of heaven in the Bible, and it's not good. So when the Catholics say that, she's the queen of heaven and so on, then you know where all these things come from. So there's a lot more in this one. It's a good reference to check. I definitely recommend it. But the conclusion is that Satan knew from the very beginning that God intended to enter reality. And of course, nobody knew the full plan of how that was going to happen or when it was going to happen. That was the great mystery of the ages that was finally revealed in Jesus. But nevertheless, Satan knew. Satan knew it was coming. And so, of course, some people say that very early on with the Nephilim, this was an attempt to corrupt the bloodline, to force God to destroy creation, basically so that he would, destroy mankind. After the flood, Satan, we know, wasted no time with creating a counterfeit of the gospel through Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz, counterfeiting the plan of salvation with false messiahs, false god kings, false religions. Unfortunately, these truths, which I just relayed to you, many people get snared by these things and think that, well, because Catholicism is obviously a continuation of this system, then Christianity must itself just be false. They conflate the gospel with religion, which is really sad. So anytime when you're facing somebody in that conversation, make sure that you make a very, very clear distinction between Mystery Babylon and the true virgin, the bride of Christ, the gospel. The real, true faith versus the counterfeit faith. So make sure that you're well versed in these things to make a distinction between the two. Either way, the flood happened probably around 3000 BC, give or take. 100 years, maybe something like that. The Tower of Babel probably around 2500 BC, give or take. And from there, we see the same model of one God King over one headquarters, ruling over the people over and over again with a counterfeit system. Counterfeit Messiah. You have, after that, Egypt and the pharaohs, and we know from the Exodus that the sorcerers had magical powers. They were able to replicate some of God's miracles or judgments, and that's not by design. God allowed them to have that power so that you could see the enemy has power, that the enemy is working with supernatural authority and has power. Very, very important. But of course, Egypt also took the legend of Nimrod, Tammuz, and Semiramis and turned it into Osiris, Isis, and Horus. And so these beliefs basically migrated from Egypt, from Babel into Egypt, into other places, and everybody had their version of it. But they were setting the foundation for all of the mystery schools to proliferate throughout the world. This counterfeit gospel of a counterfeit God King, a counterfeit Messiah, Queen of Heaven, male and female duality, all the mystery religion stuff that you probably already are familiar with. So today these things influence secret societies and all of the forces behind what you see visibly. The visible church is actually controlled by the invisible spirit of Satan. right? The spirit of Antichrist, the dark institutions of these secret organizations looking to ultimately usurp the power of God. Of course, after that, you had Assyria with Nineveh. We looked at that with the mistress of witchcrafts. The Chaldeans came along with Babylon. Babylon is compared to, the harlot as well. Persia, Greece with Alexander the Great. And then, of course, you finally get to Rome. Rome, which is the fourth beast, the beast of iron, the terrible beast. And all of these pagan empires had god kings ruling over them. And also the mystery religion, mystery schools, mystery academies, occult libraries like the Library of Alexandria and so on and so forth. Now remember that the Chaldean high priests fled to Pergamon eventually, where they eventually conferred their title of high priest Pontifex Maximus, the great bridge builder, i.e. Nimrod. They conferred that over to the Roman Caesar, which eventually became Constantine, which eventually became the Pope, the Pontifex Maximus. So, therefore, yet again, I say this again, the Pope is the modern Nimrod from Babel and a continuation of this mystery religion system, which itself, Nimrod, and what happened to Babel was a continuation of the stuff before the flood. Because remember, people likely had a new world order at that point in time. It was probably extremely horrible and something that we can't even imagine. Imagine like 20-foot giants running around in body armor and tearing people's heads off and people indulging in all sorts of... It was maximum corruption. And that's what the devil wants to get back to. So that's been a continuation throughout time. This is why, very important, very, very important point to come back to the papacy. This is why the man of lawlessness is not a singular person, but it's rather a institution of men. And how does that work? Well, it's very simple because Paul writes to Timothy about the man of God. Now, he's not saying a singular person in the future who's going to believe in God. That the man of God may be complete, as in the institution of men who are pursuing God and learning about God and sharing God and so on, that institution is complete. So when he says the man of God to Timothy, he's not talking about a particular individual. He's talking about a group or institution of men. Same thing with the man of lawlessness. It's actually an institution of men. It's not a singular person. People have been distracted from seeing this truth because, again, futurism and preterism do the opposite. They take your attention from spiritual things to physical things. God is revealing through Paul that Satan has an institution of men that he keeps to basically rule the world through. Not one singular individual that either came a long time ago, Antiochus Epiphanes or whatever the preterists believe, there's different versions, or a future Antichrist that needs to walk into a Jewish physical temple. The truth is always much more profound and spiritual. And it's also easy to spot the lie, the counterfeit, because it's an opposite of the truth. Christ is one individual who lives forever. Satan can possess people, but he can't counterfeit the incarnation. He cannot incarnate the way God did that. That's a miracle of God, that Jesus is both human, actually real human, while also being fully God, fully, completely divine. That is one of the mysteries, mystery of the incarnation. Satan can't do that. He can possess people. He possessed Judas. Satan entered into Judas. But possessing and incarnating are two completely different things. Very, very different. So Satan can possess people, but he can't counterfeit the incarnation. So the closest thing that he can do is have an institution of men that he uses in order to basically rule. And it's the opposite of Jesus, again, because where Jesus is one, the devil is many. Where Jesus lives forever, each one of these people die. And so they have to be replaced. And there's an institution that has to come because, again, Satan is limited by the physical world. Do you get it? Like, he has supernatural power. He is a very powerful enemy, but he's limited by the physical world. There is nobody that lives forever other than Jesus. Of course, you're going to live forever once he returns, but the point is, in the earth age, from zero to the return of Christ, nobody's living forever. So Satan has to constantly find another person to basically rule through. And so this is the point. The man of lawlessness is not a singular person. It's an institution of men. And in some sense, the man of lawlessness has been around since Nimrod. But of course, that is maximized in the papacy, in the papal institution. So, there are many occultists in history, like Pythagoras, Plato, Hermes Trismegistus. There's so many occultists and occult things and occult mindsets who have shaped the mystery religion and contributed to it throughout many centuries. My goal is not to cover every single one of them. My goal is to start with Rome, because Rome is the final power. And it's the power that came out of Rome is still Roman in essence. So Rome is really where we want to start. Remember that there's nothing new under the sun, so it doesn't matter to know every single one of these occult influencers and what they believed and what they did. The point is to see the pattern, to see the unbroken pattern from Eden all the way to the mark of the beast. That is the goal of today. So with that, let's see. The first item here on the list, we're starting with the church age, with 0 to about 300 AD, with Mithraism. Mithraism, also known as the Mithraic Mysteries or the cult of Mithras, was a Roman mystery religion centered on the god Mithras. Although inspired by Iranian worship of the Zoroastrian divinity Mithra, the Roman Mithras was linked to a new and distinctive imagery, and the level of continuity between Persian and Greco-Roman practice remains debatable. Well, we know from the Bible that these things are continued through history, so no argument there. The mysteries were popular among the imperial Roman army from the 1st to the 4th century CE. Worshippers of Mithras had a complex system of 7 grades of initiation and communal ritual meals. Initial initiates called themselves syndexioi, those united by the handshake. They met in dedicated Mithrae, singular Mithraeum, underground temples that survived in large numbers. The cult appears to have had its center in Rome and was popular throughout the western half of the empire, as far south as Roman Africa and Numidia, as far east as Roman Dacia, as far north as Roman Britain, and to a lesser extent Roman Syria in the east. Mithraism is viewed as the rival of early Christianity. In the 4th century, Mithras faced persecution from Christians, and the religion was subsequently suppressed and eliminated by the Roman Empire by the end of the century. No, it was actually integrated by Satan into his counterfeit, because it was time to get rid of this obviously pagan stuff. It doesn't work anymore. We need to dress paganism up in a counterfeit Christian garb. And so you can see Mithras killing the bull. Notice the hat here. You can see the little French Revolution Mithra hat. That's important to remember. And of course, Mithras is the sun god. He's got the seven rays, just like the Statue of Liberty. Nothing new under the sun, folks. It's just sun worship, which of course is worshiping the devil. Now, conclusion on that one is that Mithraism is sun worship. They got it from the Persians. The Persians got it from people before them, Babylon, and Babylon got it from Egypt. Egypt got it from everybody else. It's the same story since the dawn of time, which really, of course, is the worship of the devil. Mithraism is one of the many esoteric cults that got wiped out by Catholicism and obviously integrated. Every pagan system basically had to go underground because the counterfeit was now given authority and power. Satan did not give his throne and power to, the next pagan thing. Satan gave his throne and power and great authority to a counterfeit of the bride of Christ. Therefore, that is now the new thing. All you other threads have to be integrated. So Satan was probably rolling around laughing at destroying all these pagans for having been deceived by him and, of course, integrating them into the next thing. So the new counterfeit was just basically baptized paganism like we read, and just a continuation of these mystery threads. Now, also around that time, you have another thing called Manichaeism, and that is another influential religion that was around the same time, but also got wiped out by the new thing. Manichaeism is a Gnostic former major world religion founded in the 3rd century CE by Parthian prophet Mani in 216 to 274 in the Sasanian Empire. You probably haven't heard of this. Most people haven't. Manichaeism teaches an elaborate dualistic cosmology, describing the struggle between a good spiritual world of light and an evil material world of darkness. Really quick pause. Does that sound like anything to you in the common day? Deep state versus false light. Through an ongoing process that takes place in human history, light is gradually removed from the world of matter and returned to the world of light whence it came. Mani's teaching was intended to combine, succeed, and surpass the teachings of Platonism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Marcionism, Hellenistic and Rabbinic Judaism, Gnostic movements, ancient Greek religion, Babylonian, and other Mesopotamian religions, and mystery cults. It was a mishmash. It was just another iteration of the mystery religion. It reveres Mani as the final prophet after Zoroaster, the Buddha, and Jesus. So is this falling under the prophecy of many false Christs will come? Absolutely. False prophets, false Christs. Manichaeism was quickly successful and spread far through the Aramaic-speaking regions. It thrived between the 3rd and 7th centuries, and at its height was one of the most widespread religions in the world. Manichaean churches and scriptures existed as far east as China and as far west as the Roman Empire. It was briefly the main rival to early Christianity in the competition to replace classical polytheism before the spread of Islam. Under the Roman dominant, Manichaeism was persecuted by the Roman state and was eventually stamped out in the Roman Empire. Fascinating stuff, really. In Manichaeism, the tenets of Manichaeism are still alive and well because you're under the mystery religion. Manichaeism was Gnostic. It was really kind of one of the first major attempts of the false light by Satan before Catholicism really took over. Satan has many threads, and then he integrates them where it is most profitable. The early church was being persecuted by, again, the pagan authorities on one side, and then on the other side by the seductions of the Gnostic teachings, of the Manichaeans, of people like Marcion, all the Gnostics that were doing their thing, all the Gnostic Gospels like the Epistle of Barnabas, the Gospel of Mary and Judas and Thomas and so on. All these Gnostic texts were alive and well at that time. So you always had this double attack, obviously against Christ and leading you to the counterfeit of in place of Christ. Of course, studying history of the canon and how people came along to decide what books were canonical and what not, I talk about this in my KJV only PSYOP, shows you that the early church had very good discernment about which texts were authentic and which ones were false. In other words, the Holy Spirit was really guiding people to understand, okay, what's true and what's not. And you can see that from how the canon was formed very early on. It's very interesting, actually. Either way, eventually these things were destroyed by institutional Christianity, because that's the new thing. Gnosticism is obviously antichrist, even though it's light. This is an important distinction. Satan needed to refine his methods. Gnosticism is false light, but it's really obviously antichrist in comparison to Catholicism. Catholicism is not, it's antichrist. Of course, we've studied Catholicism quite a bit on this channel, but on face value, Catholicism appears to be right, appears to be Christian, appears that we're Jesus Christ, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're Christians, where in reality, it is almost right. And that difference between right and almost right is what gets you. So Satan needed to refine his methods, and after 10 years of the Diocletian persecution with Christianity, he basically appeared to Constantine in some sort of light vision. Of course, the Catholics will say that God appeared to him, and so with the Orthodox, but God does not, the way you know that that is a vision not from God, you test it. You test it with Scripture. No such vision appeared to anybody. If God ever appeared to anybody like Ezekiel or John or anybody else, Isaiah, there's very consistent ways that God looks. Sea of glass, throne with eyes, sun shining like the face shining like the sun, rainbow around his throne. There's very specific things. Eyes like fire, consistent. Supernatural, but consistent. Whereas if you read the vision that supposedly Constantine had of this bright light, and it was a cross or something in the sky, and it told him to put the symbol of the Chi-Rho, which is the Greek symbol of Jesus Christ, on the shields of his soldiers before his battle, and that way he would win and go conquer in my name. Very interesting vision, because again, that's not consistent with what God would say. Why would God have you do something material and put a sign on your shield and then go and conquer in that sign? That's idolatry. That God would never have you do that. And then you see the fruits after that vision, where Constantine basically united church and state, compromised the church, became the Pontifex Maximus, made a coin with like the sun god on one, and then Jesus's icon or whatever, named the Chi-Rho on another. Just really not the fruits of an authentic Damascus experience. So we can safely assume, because the Bible warns you that the devil appears as an angel of light, and we compare it to other people like Ellen White, like Ignatius of Loyola, like Joseph Smith, like Muhammad, like other false prophets in history, that Constantine was deceived. Very much so. That's why I said I'm not sure that he ever was really a full convert. He could have ever maybe truly converted at the end of his life. It's possible, but As far as I'm concerned, my leaning is no. So Satan had to refine this mystery religion, the packaging. And of course, after the Diocletian persecution, Constantine came around, legalized Christianity, and gave the Christians a much needed and desired solution of relief. But that relief came at a very big cost, and that's exactly what Satan did. He knew that they were ready for a counterfeit by being persecuted and hunted down like animals. Now I'll give you a little comfort in exchange for compromise, which of course is a sign of the end as well. Either way, the institutional religion model is not as obvious as plain out Gnosticism that teaches that Jesus is just a teacher and, you have to accept, like Gnosticism is obviously false. So you need something a little more nuanced. You need something more almost right. You need something that says, yes, Jesus is God. Oh, absolutely. But, you have to take this Eucharist every Sunday and you have to consume his flesh because that's what he said. Didn't he say that in the Bible? And so on and so forth. And so institutional religion is not as obvious. It is if you study the Word and you understand what God says, but for most people, it's not. It's much closer to right than Gnosticism. Do you get it? So these other threads had to be integrated and destroyed because now institutional religion, Catholicism, was the way to go. Institutional religion acknowledges Jesus as God, but subverts the gospel simultaneously through things like the sacramental system, synergistic salvation, inversions of spiritual truths to physical truths like infant baptism, the Eucharist, and so on and so forth. So it's a lot of almost right. And again, if you read the scriptures and you know what they say about these things, then it's pretty obvious. But most people don't realize that these things are almost right inversions. The key was to make something that looked like the real deal, while still preserved the tenets of the mystery religion in the background. And Satan was successful with Constantine and eventually with the Pope and with Catholicism. Now, next in the sequence here, again, this is not everything, it's just I'm trying to paint a picture for you of the sequence of things leading up to current events. Of course, in this section, we're looking just up to the formation of the Jesuits. In 496 to 700 AD, approximately, you had the Merovingian dynasty, which is a very well-known thing in the occult and in the bloodline of these people and so on and so forth. I'll read about it here. The Merovingian dynasty was the ruling family of the Franks from around the middle of the 5th century until the 751. They first appear as kings of the Franks in the Roman army of northern Gaul. By 509, they had united all the Franks and northern Gallo-Romans under their rule. They conquered most of Gaul, defeating the Visigoths and the Burgundians, and also extended their rule into Raetia. In Germania, the Alemanni, Bavari, and Saxons accepted their lordship. The Merovingian realm was the largest and most powerful of the states of the Western Europe following the breakup of the empire of Theodoric the Great. So this Merovingian dynasty has a lot of important things about it. The first well-known Merovingian king was Childeric I. His son Clovis I converted to Nicene Christianity. Important to understand. He united the Franks and conquered most of Gaul. The Merovingians treated their kingdom as a single yet divisible. Clovis's 4 sons divided the kingdom amongst themselves, and it remained divided until 679, with the exception of 4 short periods. After that, it was divided again, once more, and then the main divisions of the kingdom were Austrasia, Neustria, Burgundy, and Aquitaine. Various kingdoms and so on. Legendary origins. This is interesting. The 7th century Chronicles of Fredegar implies that the Merovingians were descendants from a sea beast called Quinotaur. Interesting. Foreshadowing of the future. It is said that while Clodio was staying at the seaside with his wife, one summer his wife went into the sea and at midday to bathe, and a beast of Neptune, rather like a Quinotaur, found her. In the event, she was made pregnant either by the beast or by her husband, and she gave birth to a son called Merovich, from whom the kings of the Franks have subsequently been called Merovingians. Now, are you noticing a parallel to all of that mythology with Nimrod and Semiramis? Same old stuff. Special lineage, special bloodline, divine right to rule. Counterfeit faith, counterfeit Messiah, counterfeit God kings. These are some coins. So Merovingian dynasty is very important in the sequence of things because Clovis, who came from the Merovingians, and who a lot of these occult secret societies tie their bloodlines to some degree, the Holy Roman Empire and through there back to, ancient Egypt and so on. Clovis was a very important figure in the development of the papal power. This is a PDF from Australasian Record, March 1925. Is the year 508 AD of prophetic significance? Volume 28, number 9. We're going to read just, I think, what did I have here? I think I had just the first page plus the first column of the second page. All right, let's see. For many, this is Seventh-day Adventists, but eat the meat, spit out the bones. For many Seventh-day Adventists, for many years, Seventh-day Adventists have taught that the year 508 AD saw the downfall of paganism, as the year 538 AD marked the establishment of the papacy, and that the prophetic periods of 1290 and 1260 years commenced in 508 and 538, respectively, and terminated together in 1798. Concerning the year 538 AD, we are perhaps best acquainted with the historic data with which has led us as a people to fix on this date. But is there any significant historical evidence for setting on the 508 AD as the commencement for the 1290 years? Or is it only an arbitrary date formed by reckoning back 1290 years from 1798? We submit the following evidence that there were events of worldwide importance which reached their climax at that particular year, marking the commencement of a time period of great prophetic import. With little comment, we set down the references from history, believing that what is told thereof will make the matter plain. The references will center around Clovis, as these excerpts relate chiefly to his services to the Roman Church. But it was not alone because of the help granted to the Catholic hierarchy that Clovis is counted great. Says the historian, quote, "The importance of the task which he performed, though from the basest motives, and the influence of his reign on the destinies of Europe can hardly be overrated. He founded the monarchy on a firm and enduring basis. He leveled with a strong, though bloody hand, the barriers which separated Franks from Franks and consolidated a number of isolated and hostile tribes into a powerful and united nation." That's from Historian's History of the World, Volume 2. But he is related to the prophecy chiefly from the great aid he gave to the Roman Catholic Church. Quote, "Clovis became by his conversion the object of hope and attachment to such a party, Catholic, in almost every country on the continent of Europe. He had the powerful support of the whole body of the Catholic clergy, in whose hearts the interests of their church far outweighed all the other considerations." Nicolaitans, anybody? "If in far happier ages than those of which we speak, the most polluted consciences have purchased consolation and even hope by building churches, endowing monasteries, and paying reverential homage to the dispensers of God's mercy, can we wonder that the extraordinary services of a Clovis to the Catholic Christianity would cover even his foul sins as with a cloak of snow? He had indeed, without the slightest provocation, deprived a noble and peaceable neighbor of his power and life. He had treacherously murdered his royal kindred, and deprived their children of their birthright. He had on all occasions shown himself the heartless ruffian that he is, the greedy conqueror, the bloodthirsty tyrant, but by his conversion he had led the way to the triumph of Catholicism. He had saved the Roman Catholic Church from the Scylla and Charybdis of heresy and paganism, planted it on a rock and in the very center of Europe, and fixed its doctrines and traditions in the hearts of the conquerors of the West. In Gregory's famous History of the Franks, the cruel and unscrupulous king appears as God's chosen instrument for the extension of the Catholic faith. Certainly Clovis quickly learned to combine his own interests with those of the Church, and the alliance between the Pope and the Frankish kings was destined to have a great influence upon the history of Western Europe. These are all different quotes from that book, History of Western Europe, page 36 on that one. The conversion of the Franks, says the historian Milman, was the most important event in its remote as well as its immediate consequences in European history. It was of such moment for the reason that the Franks embraced the Orthodox Catholic, while almost all of the other German invaders of the empire had embraced the heretical Arian creed. This secured them the loyalty of the Roman subjects and also gained for them the official favor of the Church of Rome. Thus was laid the basis for the ascendancy of the West of the Frankish kings. In AD 496, an event took place destined to exercise a momentous influence on the fate of the papacy and of Europe. In that year, Clovis, king of the Franks, in fulfillment of a vow made on the field of Tolbiac, where he was victorious over the Alemanni, was baptized at Reims. On that memorable day, observes Gibbon, when Clovis ascended from the baptismal font, he alone in the Christian world deserved the name and prerogatives of a Catholic king. Rome hailed the auspicious event as a token of a long series of similar triumphs, and she rewarded the devotion of Clovis by bestowing on him the title, which he was transmitted downward through the 1400 years of his successors, the kings of France, of the eldest son of the church. At this time, the Visigoths possessed all the southwestern portion of Gaul. They too were Arians, and the mutual conspiracy of the Catholics and the Gothic dominions and the crusade of the Franks from the side of the Clovis soon brought on another holy war. At the assembly of princes and warriors at Paris, AD 508, Clovis complained, It grieves me to see that the Arians still possess the fairest portions of Gaul. Let us march against them with the aid of God, and having vanquished the heretics, we will possess and divide their fertile province. Clotilda added her pious exhortation to the effect that doubtless the Lord would more readily lend his aid if some gift were made. And in response, Clovis seized his battle axe and threw it as far as he could, and as it went whirling through the air, he said, There, on the spot where my Francesca shall fall, will I erect a church in honor of the holy apostles. Under date of 8508, de Cormenin, in his History of the Popes, says of Clovis the following. The exploits of Clovis in Gaul had so increased that the reputation of the warriors of the Franks that the Emperor Anastasius wished to make a treaty of alliance with his new conqueror and had sent him for this purpose. Ambassadors charged with the rich presents, among which were a magnificent crown of gold and rich with precious stones, which of the King of France sent to the pontiff to be deposited in the Church of St. Peter at Rome. History of the Popes, page 99. So there's a lot to do with this, but basically these are all just different testimonies from different historians about the influential aspect of Clovis's conversion. Very, very important. Remember Revelation 13:2. The devil gave the papacy, the papal power, his throne and power and great authority. All of the devil's efforts are going to be centered around the papal power. But obviously that's not going to happen overnight. Do you understand? The book of Revelation gives you a time period of 2,000 plus years of things happening. And what is the code, the meta behind all of these things happening? And the fact that the devil chose the papal power means that all the action that you see, satanic action, is centered around this power to be the vehicle for which he will receive worship. But that doesn't happen overnight. The devil has to use people, and people die, and empires get judged. So it's a long and arduous journey. But the devil is consistently working in rebellion to try to make this happen. And of course, God has allowed it because, again, the drawing of the elect versus the drawing of the reprobate to the devil. So Clovis converting was a big deal because now all of this physical territory of the Merovingian dynasty became Catholic. And Rome saw an opportunity to basically magnify itself and take out all of these other competing factions like the Arians, like the Cathars, like the Manichaeans, and so on, to basically raise itself up as a power through these kings. And eventually, of course, you'll see that Justinian gives the Pope full authority only 30 years later, which is when the 1260 period starts. And we talk about this in my End Time series. But Revelation is just telling you what Satan's choice was in the entire church age. Where is he actualizing his power? Satan immediately chose his next move after being thrown down to earth, but now he has to integrate all these things. He has to do the work and integrate them. So of course these things take time. What you see by looking at history, and that's why I said be grateful that God has placed you in a time where you have the ability to look at such wide swaths of history. So profound. You have the ability to see these things at your fingertips, and to see how Satan has moved through history to basically fulfill this desire of being worshipped, and therefore being able to understand what comes ahead of you in the future. And of course, you also see the glory of God as a result, and that God's message is preserved, God's word is preserved, God's elect are preserved, God is victorious. It's such a profound thing to look through history, such a profound journey and story that God has created. History is his story. So what you see in history is this integration, and I hope that you're starting to see it in this presentation. There's lots of strange things about the Merovingian dynasty, like the sea beast foreshadowing. I think that's very interesting, very curious. They have some of the Nimrod and Tammuz legendary legends, like the sacred birth and, basically this connection to divinity and so on. A lot of secret societies tie their bloodlines to this old empire. Just typical occult nonsense. The point is that they converted to the new thing. And as a result, that was a shift, because Clovis's conversion was a major step towards papal supremacy, towards institutionalized religion through one man that controlled both the religion and the politics. Remember that this was happening. 508 AD is around the time of the Compromised Church. Compromised Church was 321 AD with Constantine. Thyatira, which is the Middle Age churches, we could say started when the papal power approach basically was given full power in 538 AD, where Emperor Justinian, who was the next in line, I forget if there was one between him and Clovis, but he was kind of the next one. That was very significant. He made a decree to make the Pope the corrector of heresies. And again, I talk about that in my End Time series, but basically the Pope became the one to be the grand poobah, the one who could tear kings down, put them up, the corrector of heresies, the one who can tell you what's right or wrong, left or right. And all of these things fulfilled the prophecies of the little horn, ruling without an army of his own, by peace destroying many, plucking up 3 kings before him. We talk about that quite a bit in the End Times series. But all of this happened around the third church, which is the Pergamon church, the Church of Compromise. And what's very interesting is that Nicolaitans are mentioned in that church. And if you remember what we talked about, Nicolaitans lording their authority over the people. So you see a lot of these prophetic themes happening throughout this time, which is just so fascinating. Now, the next significant thing to discuss is Islam. Around 600 AD, of course, you have Muhammad, and about 100 years after the Pope came to his power from 530 AD, about 100 years after, you have the creation of Islam. And, of course, the Bible prophesied Islam in the 5th trumpet. See my trumpets video. Islam was a judgment against the papal power. Eventually, it became the Ottoman Empire to judge the Byzantine and, some Roman powers up through Spain and so on. But Islam is a key player in the development of the Synagogue of Satan. And you'll see what I mean by that. Very important. I'm just going to cite 2 videos to watch. My Islam episode, what's the role of Islam in the End Time series, and my video, Did the Catholic Church Create Islam? Get some discernment there and how to walk the narrow road with Islam. What do we think about Islam? What do we think about the Catholic Church's relation to Islam? I talk about all of this stuff that we're talking about today with Mystery Babylon and how it's a greater thing in scope than just the Catholic Church. And if you can see that spiritual truth, then the Bible is right. Because here's how the Muslims will weaponize history against you, and Catholics likewise will weaponize history against you. Islam is an abomination. And so we have to basically prove that Islam is a harlot daughter and an abomination of Mystery Babylon. Now, if you say that Mystery Babylon is just the Catholic Church, and you're limiting this spiritual reality to just a physical manifestation, one of the physical manifestations, then you can be refuted, because the arguments from the apologists on both sides, Catholic and Muslim, can say, well, there's not that much evidence linking the Catholic Church to directly starting Islam through Muhammad. There's some interesting things. My particular take is what's likely. Spiritually, I think obviously Satan is manipulating everybody in the background. What's likely is that Muhammad fulfilled a false Christ role for the Arabs that were now the odd man out. You had the Jews, you had the Christians with their institutional religions, and the Arabs were just this nomadic tribe without a religion. They were still pagans, but it wasn't organized. And so the devil saw an opportunity there to create a counterfeit daughter, another harlot, that was just ripe for the picking, because the Arabs wanted their own pope. They wanted their own Messiah. They wanted their own prophet. And it was a perfect opportunity to create one. There is maybe some connection there with the Catholic Church, but I think that it's easier to argue that the connection is secondary, in the sense that it does make sense that the Catholic Church also created Islam, contributed to the creation of Islam would probably be a better way to state it. in the sense that the Catholic Church's influence in the area, denominationalism, institutionalization, was very influential in the lives of the people around Muhammad, like Khadijah, like Waraka, like Tamim al-Dari. All these people, someone like Waraka was a former Christian, quote-unquote Christian, Synagogue of Satan. They say one thing, but they're not. All of these people, Khadijah was supposedly, some relationships there with Catholicism, and who knows if she was actually, some people say she was in a convent. I'm not super convinced about that. But either way, the fact that the Roman Catholic Church was very present in that area and the things that it imparted into the world influenced the development of these people who went from dark to light. They went from one thing that they didn't like to the false light of a false prophet named Muhammad. So the devil used all of these things to create thread after thread after thread, which now he's going to integrate in this final day and age. So watch those episodes. They're very edifying. They're very important to understand how to walk the narrow road with nuance on the topic of Islam. But nevertheless, spiritually, again, Islam is a harlot daughter of Mystery Babylon for many reasons. Muhammad is the greatest false prophet in history. That's not even deniable. He's deceived billions of people. Of course, Satan has been the one deceiving people through him. Right after Muhammad died, Islam split into several factions and was infiltrated by the occultists, by Gnostics, by secret societies. We'll talk about this. Some obviously argue that the Roman Catholic Church propped up Muhammad to create an army for the Pope, and then that kind of backfired. I discussed that in these videos. I don't think you can prove that 100%. I think the evidence is tenable. Alberto Rivera says that, but you don't have that much documentation. Again, though, you do have the fact that the Arabs were ripe for delusion because they didn't have their own institution, and because the Catholic system had influenced all the people around Muhammad, including Muhammad. So there's a spiritual parentage there, and again, if you can see spiritual truths, then it's much easier to A, defend the Bible, and B, not get snared by one thing or another. So this is why we have to have spiritual eyes to see. Islam, think of it like the biggest Unitarian church in history. It's a Unitarian harlot daughter. And a lot of the beliefs that Muhammad imported into this religion were taken from Catholicism. There's a lot of similarities between that and Catholicism. We talk about them quite a bit. So, is there spiritual parentage between Mystery Babylon and Islam? Yes. And I'm speaking of Mystery Babylon as the mystery religion. Is there spiritual parentage between the final iteration of Mystery Babylon as the Roman Catholic Church and Islam? Yes, there is. So they're both true, but you have to understand how to defend them and not go way off balance and say, yeah, the Roman Catholic Church absolutely created Islam. It was a conspiracy. That's hard to defend, especially to people who know their history. It's a hard one to defend. But if you argue from the spiritual perspective, there's a lot to be argued there for sure. And we talk about it in those videos. So once you see it, you can't undo it. Islam is a giant Unitarian church. Now, I want to talk about the influence and the cross-pollination of this secret society order called the Assassins and the Knights Templar. Very interesting little story here. And this is from dailysaba.com. And the article title is Order of the Assassins and the Establishment of the Knights Templar. In the early days of Islam, a group of men brought from Egypt by a Yemenite Jew named Abdullah ibn Saba, who posed as a Muslim, killed the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad and the third Caliph Uthman ibn Affan. The unrest that broke out after the death of the Caliph continued during the life of the Prophet's other son-in-law and the fourth Caliph Ali ibn Abi Talib. Among the friends of the Prophet, namely his companions, the issue of punishing the murderers of Uthman caused stark differences of opinion. The Prophet grew and caused the companions to fight amongst themselves. Those who sided with Ali in the war were called Shia, supporters. Abdullah ibn Saba, who played a major role in the outbreak of the war, attributed divinity to Ali. Caliph Ali wanted to have this man executed, but he was afraid of the growing instigation and sent him into exile instead. However, Abdullah ibn Saba did not remain docile in his travels. He began saying that the three caliphs before Ali usurped his right to the caliphate. He fabricated hadiths in this direction and distanced the Shia people from the Sunni branch and laid the foundations of Shi'ism, which is similar to Catholicism and Christianity. Ishmaelism. Shi'ism was divided itself into various sects over time. Those who accepted Ishmael, one of the grandchildren of Ali, as imam, took the name Ismaili. The Ismailis established the Fatimid state with its center in Cairo. Their state spread to North Africa, Sicily, Arabia. After the 8th caliph of the Fatimids, the Ismailis split into 2 branches. Some supported the caliph's eldest son, Nizar, and became known as Nizari. Among the Ismailis, the Jewish ophthalmologist Mayum al-Qada, who followed the footsteps of Abdullah ibn Saba, founded Batiniya. Batiniya was a Hermetic belief system, ding, 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 that is similar to the Kabbalah of the Jews and was formed by blending the philosophy of ancient Egypt and Plato with religions such as Zoroastrianism and Manichaeism. Nothing new under the sun. Batanis said that the Quran has an apparent meaning and a hidden meaning. The apparent meaning, namely prayer, fasting, and zakat, etc., is not important but rather symbolic. The main thing is the hidden meaning, which not everyone can understand. Those who spread this belief were called Dai. Hassan-i-Sabah. One of the Ismailis who supported Nizar was Hassan-i-Sabah. Hassan, the son of a Shiite imam, was a Batini missionary, that is, a Dai. So he's one of these mystics. He went to Egypt in 1076 and studied there. When he returned to Iran, he started his missionary work under the name of Ad-Dawut al-Jadiyah, that is, new propaganda. Nothing new under the sun, though. Hassan, together with the men he gathered as a result of his work, captured the Alamut fortress in Dailam, where Zoroastrianism was dominant in Iran, in 1090 and made it a base. He classified his men and established a new organization. He declared himself Sheikh ul Jabal, Old Man of the Mountain. He called those who propagated their faith Dai, like Ismailis, and named his men whom he would use as terrorists as Fedai, also known as the Fedayeen. Hassan-i-Sabah exploited his Fedais, who were later known as Hashashins in Europe as they used hashish by promising paradise to them. According to the narration of the Venetian traveler Marco Polo, Hassan had a fake paradise built in a valley of beautiful gardens for this reason. Counterfeit, salvation. Counterfeit, gospel, doing it your own way. Are you seeing a thread? The Hashashins, who would later be called assassins, organized assassinations against the Sunni state leaders who opposed the Batiniya propaganda. Especially the Seljuk Turks became their worst enemy, epitomized by their famous killings of Seljuk leaders such as Vizier Nizam al-Mulk. The assassination methods of the assassins were similar to those of the Jewish Sicarii, originating in Palestine in the 1st century BC. Sicarii is the plural of Latin of sicarius and means dagger wielder. Just as the Sicarii covertly attacked the Romans, but mostly to their co-religionists who'd collaborated with the Romans, the assassin hid a dagger under their cloaks and stabbed their targets by approaching them silently during the daytime. There was, however, one key difference between the Sicarii and assassins. While the Sicarii surprised their targets by crying out loud as if they were a relative of the soon-to-be victim, the assassins waited silently in the shadows, accepting and anticipating their imminent attack. The assassinations of the assassins continued around Iran and Syria during the time of their sheikhs, who succeeded Hassan-i-Sabah after his death. But there were no Jews or Shiites among the others' victims because there were many Jews affiliated with the order. Whoops. For example, when Muslim leader Salah ad-Din Ayyub, or better known in the West as Saladin, signed an agreement with the Crusaders in 1192, there were about 4,000 Jews among the assassins that were occultists, Jews that say they're one thing, that they identify as God's people, but actually are serving Satan. Knights Templar. The Fatimid state of the Ismailis lost Jerusalem to the Turks in 1073, but they managed to take it back in 1098. Meanwhile, the Pope had begun gathering an army of crusaders in Europe against the Turks to help the Eastern Roman Empire. As a result of this crusade, the Fatimids lost Jerusalem, which they had taken from the Turks just a year ago, but to the Crusaders this time. Christian armies established the Kingdom of Jerusalem here, which would last for nearly 200 years. The Crusaders, Nizari Ismailis, that is the assassins, had a common enemy and therefore they became closer in time. The honor and treats, wine and music, hashish and dancing girls presented to the Crusaders when they were guests of the assassins blew their minds. The Crusaders wanted to establish a similar organization themselves. Thus, Hugues de Payen, king of Jerusalem, Baldwin II's chief counsel, founded the Order of the Knights Templar in Jerusalem in 1118. The organizational structure of the Templars was arranged in accordance with the Assassins. Remember that the Assassins were occultists. The Templars were classified as knights, esquires, and lay brethren as equivalent to the Assassins' classification as Rafiq, Fedai, and Lasik. The titles of Prior, Grand Prior, and Grand Master of the Templars were also the equivalents of Dai, Dayul Kebir, Great Dai, and Sheikh ul Sebel of the Assassins. Even the clothing of the Assassins and the Templars was almost identical, a red symbol on a white background. Most importantly, the esoteric beliefs and rituals of the Assassins influenced the Templars. Both groups performed a ceremony similar to today's Masonic initiation ceremonies when recruiting new members to the sect. Remember how the cult of Mithras, they consider themselves those of the handshake? Nothing new under the sun. The Mongols destroyed the Alamut castle of Asat. This is the end, did I highlight this? The end of the Batinis. Salah ad-Din Ayyubi, the Sultan of the Ayyub dynasty, who cleared Egypt from the Shiites and reestablished the unity of Islam, showed the Templars the mercy he showed to the Christians of the city when he conquered Jerusalem in 1187. The liberated Templars returned to Europe. When all of Syria and Palestine fell into the hands of Muslims in 1291, the rest of the Templars also left the Islamic lands, not to return for a long time. The Mongols destroyed the Alamut castle of the Assassins, which had been weakened over the years. Some of the Assassins continued to spread their esoteric beliefs by escaping to Azerbaijan and Anatolia. Some of them went to India with Hassan Ali Shah, who was a descendant of the Hashashi Dayul Kebir years later. Hassan Ali Shah, who received the support of the British there, became the leader of the world's Nizaris under the title of Aga Khan I. Returning to Europe, the Knights Templar were oppressed by their wealth and sectarian sects that contradicted the Christian faith. Finally, the Pope outlawed the order in 1312 and charged European kings with arresting all Templars. Most of the Templars were captured and accused by papal officials of insulting their Christian faith, worshipping idols, and sexual perversion. Some of them, including their master Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake in France. Knights of Malta. Members of Venetian noble families such as Dandolo, Dulce, Falieri, Contarini, and Morosini, who were the liaisons between Europe and the Orient, settled in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which was established after the Crusades. These nobles were in close contact with the Templars and were allies. When the sect was closed, the center of the Batinis in Europe became Venice. The property and the churches of the band Templars passed to the Order of Knights of the Hospital of St. John in Jerusalem, known as the Knights Hospitaller. The Knights of the Order, fleeing from the conquest of the Turks, fled to Cyprus, from there to Rhodes, and from there to Malta. Today they are known as the Knights of the Order of Malta. So, very important stuff, a lot to unpack, and of course a lot more to unpack, but hopefully you see that how tenacious Satan is throughout time, how he's constantly working various angles. God is judging, and he immediately goes to the next thing and transfers the mystery religion there. After Muhammad's death, Islam immediately became subject to Gnosticism, secret societies, warring factions, all kinds of things. A Gnostic Jew named Abdullah ibn Mayyam took over, was very influential. And of course, this caused a lot of division and strife. It led to secret orders within Islam that were esoteric, the Assassins. There's the Fatimites, I think, was after that too as well. So there's a lot of these things. We talk about them in the various videos I cited to you. But these orders still control Islam today because, again, Islam is a harlot daughter of Mystery Babylon. And of course, because the devil gave his power to the Catholic Church, then ultimately all these secret societies will serve the agents of the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church controls Islam. That's why Islam is going to be integrated. So the future is not Muslim, folks. The Muslims are going to convert. Just give it a few years. So either way, the Assassins cross-pollinated beliefs with the Templars during the Crusades, and Satan basically transferred this hierarchical system into the Roman Catholic Church through the various mystery threads that came through basically all of these pagan systems, eventually coming into the Assassins, and then from the Assassins to the Templars. The Assassins got judged. The Templars eventually were disbanded, but they transferred all of this stuff into other secret societies too, like the Freemasons and so on. We'll look at some articles there. As you can see how it goes, boop, 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 just keep on going to the next thing, leapfrog. The Assassins, another notice too, is that the Assassins were a mix of Muslims and Jews, and people The point is people who say that they are one faith, as in believing in God, when in fact the assassins were actually esoteric. Synagogue of Satan. Do you get it? Both Muslims and Jews on the surface say, oh, we believe in God. We believe in the one God. But in reality, these particular Muslims and Jews that were part of the assassins were occultists. They were Gnostics. They were esoteric. During the Crusades, also, you had the Crusaders discovering Kabbalah, Rabbinic Judaism from all of the interactions with, the Middle East. And we know that the Knights Templar were exceedingly corrupt and were worshiping the devil. So there's a couple of things on that. This is from Lundy is LundyIsleofAvalon.co.uk. The mysteries of the Knights Templar, the Baphomet, feminine origin. Let's see if we can see this whole thing because it's not displaying correctly. Tiny, teeny, tiny text. The Baphomet. We found indisputable evidence for the charge of secret ceremonies involving a head of some kind. Indeed, the existence of such a head proved to be one of the dominant themes running through the Inquisition records. Among the confiscated goods of the Paris preceptory, a reliquary in the shape of a woman's head was found. It was hinged on top and contained what appeared to have been relics of a peculiar kind. This is basically what are they documenting as to what these Templars are doing? And they had these idols, and one of them was the head of a woman, which is so interesting, isn't it? Mystery Babylon's a woman. The head of a woman, of course, they worshipped her as Sophia, and there's a lot of relationship there between Sophia as the wisdom, as the divine feminine, and Baphomet, and so on. Now, let me just check really quick. Did I highlight anything on here? Oh, no, I was just going to read it. Okay. The reliquary was a great head of gilded silver, most beautiful and constituting the image of a woman. Inside were two head bones, wrapped in a cloth of white linen, with another red cloth around it. A label was attached on which was written the legend Caput Livium. The bones inside were those of a rather small woman. This is testimony by Orso Le Procès des Templiers. So these are various testimonies from different authors. Head 58 meters remains a baffling enigma, but it is worth noting that the M may not be an M at all, but the astrological symbol for Virgo. So there's something to do with a divine feminine that they were worshipping. That it had feminine origin is shown by Gerald Massey, who writes Mette was the Baphomet, or a mother of breath. According to von Hammer, the formula of faith inscribed on a chalice belonging to the Templars is as follows. Let Mette be exalted, who causes all things to bud and blossom. It is our root, it is 1 and 7. It is Octonymius, the eightfold name. So this was the god they were worshiping, the goddess, the mother earth, the divine feminine, basically. Which, of course, is Antichrist. Herodotus speaks of the practice in the obscure Isodones of gilding head and sacrificing to it. Cleomenes of Sparta is said to have persevered the head of Iconides in honey and consulted it before undertaking an important task. Several vases of the 4th century BC in Arturia depict scenes of persons interrogating oracular heads. And the severed head of the Rusticarians, which continues to speak, is mentioned decisively by Aristotle. Julian Jaynes, The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. A similar tradition could be found in the Celtic Church of the Severed Head, which figured predominantly in Peredur, a Welsh romance about the Holy Grail. A great lady of Maraclea was loved by a Templar, a lord of Sidon, but she died in her youth, and on the night of her burial, this wicked lover crept into the grave, dug up her body, and violated it. Then a voice from the void bade him return in 9 months' time he would find a son. He obeyed the injunction, and the appointed time he opened the grave, and again it found a head on the leg of bones and the skeleton, skull, and crossbones. The same voice bade him guard it well, for it would be the giver of all good things, and so he carried it away with him. Ward, Freemasonry and the Ancient Gods. Some really weird stuff going on with the Templars. One chronicler cites the name of a woman in story, which would be seen clearly to derive from Isis. Nothing new under the sun. At one time there was only God. He was all omnipotent and existed alone. This caused him to become discontented. Thus he split himself into two in order to create a mate. He kept the elements of order and logic for his own being and gave his mate the elements of chaos and emotion for her being. Her name is Isa, or Isis. She became so overwhelmed with love at her creation that when he kissed her, she gave him a reaction which was to become known as the chosen response. The chosen response was the first acknowledgement and reaction of love between a male and a female in the universe, and this became the greatest secret of mystery of mankind, being the Holy Grail. This is from Synopsis of the Merovingian Bible, Angels Among Us, the Gnostic Johannine Christian Path. Dr. Hugh Schoenfield in the Essene Odyssey had discovered a system of cryptography. He called it the Atbash cipher. This is interesting, which had been used to conceal certain names in Essene Zadokite Nazarene texts. So now we're dating back to Rabbinic Judaism. This system of coding figured, for example, in a number of the scrolls found at Qumran. And when he used this system, by the way, he found that Baphomet was really a code for Sophia, which is the divine feminine of wisdom that they're worshipping. Schoenfield showed that by applying the Hebrew Atbash code to the name Baphomet, here we go, the name Sophia, female wisdom, is revealed. Sophia is equated with Isis by Plutarch. Whoops. Same old stuff. Isis's magic was allied to the wisdom of the Egyptian god Thoth. His wife or consort Nehemot was known to the Gnostics as Sophia. By this analysis, therefore, when the Templars worshipped Baphomet, what they were really doing was worshipping the principle of wisdom. Grant Hancock, sign in the seal. From the Templars' use of the Atbash cipher, it is probable that some form of Nazarene or Neo-Nazarene sect had continued to survive in the Middle East as late as the 12th century and had made its teachings available to the West. So you have esoteric threads through the Assassins, you have esoteric threads through Rabbinic Judaism and Kabbalah, all being wrapped into the Templars, which eventually were the basis for the Jesuits and the Freemasons and everything else. So, very interesting. This is history. This is, what is this one? This is, why are the Templars devil worshippers? Yes, I think history.co.uk. This is what the website is. And the title is, Were the Templars Secret Devil Worshippers? Let's see, what did I highlight on here? I highlighted one little tiny paragraph, I think, somewhere. Yes. The Gnostic connection was given a new lease when Dr. Hugh Schoenfield, one of the scholars who analyzed the Dead Sea Scrolls after they were discovered in the 1940s, applied the Hebrew Atbash to the cipher word Baphomet. The Atbash cipher is a simple substitution cipher which was used to encode words by replacing each letter of the alphabet with another. Schoenfield believed the cipher revealed Baphomet to be a coded translation of Sophia, a divine figure in Gnostic mysticism. So, this is confirming to you what the other thing said. Now, let's look at the Templars. This is going to be a rather lengthier article on the Templars, and we're going to go through it and take pauses if necessary. This is from Heritage History, and this is a book called Secret Societies and Subversive Movements by Nesta Webster, and it's been published on this website. So, in the year 118, 19 years after the First Crusade had ended with the defeat of the Muslims, the capture of Antioch and Jerusalem, and the installment of Godfrey de Bouillon as king of the latter city, a band of 9 Frenchmen, gentilshommes, led by Hughes de Payens and Godfrey de Saint-Omer, formed themselves into an order of the protection of pilgrims to the Holy Sepulchre. Baldwin II, who at this moment succeeded to the throne of Jerusalem, presented them with a house near the site of the Temple of Solomon, hence the name of the Knights Templar under which they were to become famous. In 1128, the order was sanctioned by the Council of Troyes and by the Pope, and a rule was drawn up by St. Bernard under which the Knights Templar were bound by the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Yeah, right. But although the Templars distinguished themselves by many deeds of valor, the regulation that they were to live solely on alms led to donations so enormous that, abandoning their vow of poverty, they spread themselves over Europe, and by the end of the 12th century had become a rich and powerful body. Remember that. The motto that the order had inscribed upon its banner, Non nobis domine sed nominoto da gloriam, has likewise been forgotten. For their faith waxing cold, they gave themselves up to pride and ostentation. Thus, as an 18th century Masonic writer has expressed it, quote, the war which for greater numbers of warriors of good faith proved the source of weariness, of losses and misfortunes, became for them, the Templars, only the opportunity for booty and aggrandizement. And if they distinguished themselves by a few brilliant actions, their motive soon ceased to be a matter of doubt when they were seen to enrich themselves even with the spoils of the Confederates, to increase their credit by the extent of the new possessions they had acquired, to carry arrogance to the point of rivaling crowned princes in pomp and grandeur, to refuse their aid against the enemies of the faith, as the history of Saladin testifies, and finally to ally themselves with that horrible and sanguinary prince named Old Man of the Mountain, Prince of the Assassins. What we just talked about. The truth of the last accusation is, however, open to question. For at the time, at any rate, the Templars had been at war with the Assassins. When in 1152 the Assassins murdered Raymond, Comte de Tripoli, the Templars entered their territory and forced them to sign a treaty by which they were to pay a yearly tribute of 12,000 gold pieces in expiation of the crime. Some years later, the Old Man of the Mountain sent an ambassador to Amaury, king of Jerusalem, to tell him privately that if the Templars would forego the payment of this tribute, he and his followers would embrace the Christian faith. Ding, ding, ding. Synagogue of Satan. Amaury accepted, offering at the same time to compensate the Templars, but some of the knights assassinated the ambassador before he could return to his master. When asked for reparations, the Grand Masters threw the blame on an evil one-eyed knight named Gautier de Masnel. It's evident, therefore, that the relations between the Templars and the Assassins were at first far from amicable. Nevertheless, it appears probable that later on an understanding was brought about between them. Both on this charge and on that of the treachery towards the Christian armies, Dr. Boessel's impartial view of the question may be quoted as the following. When in 1149 the Emperor Conrad III failed before Damascus, the Templars were believed to have a secret understanding with the garrison of the city. In 1154 they were said to have sold for 60,000 gold pieces a prince of Egypt who had wished to become a Christian. He was taken home to suffer certain death at the hands of his fanatical family. In 1166, Amaury, king of Jerusalem, hanged 12 members of the order for betraying a fortress to Nureddin. And Dr. Boessel goes on to say that it cannot be disputed that they had a long and important dealing with the Assassins and were therefore suspected, not unfairly, of imbibing their precepts and following their principles. By the end of the 13th century, the Templars had become suspect not only in the eyes of the clergy, but of the general public. Amongst the common people, one of their latest apologists admit, vague rumors circulated. They talked of the covetousness and want and scruple of the knights, of their passion for aggrandizement and their rapacity. Their haughty insolence was proverbial. Drinking habits were attributed to them. The saying was already in use, quote, to drink like a Templar. The old German word temple house indicates a house of ill fame. The same rumors had reached Clement V even before his ascension to the papal throne in 1305. And in this same year, he summoned the Grand Master of the Order, Jacques de Molay, to return to France from the island of Cyprus, where he was assembling fresh forces to avenge the recent reverses of the Christian armies. De Molay arrived in France with 60 other Knights Templar and 150,000 gold florins, as well as a large quantity of silver that the order had amassed in the East. The Pope now set himself to make inquiries concerning the charges of unspeakable apostasy against God, detestable idolatry, execrable vice, and many heresies that had been secretly intimated to him. But to quote his own words, quote, because it did not seem likely nor credible that men of such religion who were believed often to shed their blood and frequently expose their persons to the peril of death for Christ's name, and who showed such great and many signs of devotion both in divine offices as well as in fasts, as in other devotional observances, should be so forgetful of their salvation as to do these things, we were unwilling to give ear to this kind of insinuation. So the Pope doubted it at first, which is interesting. The King of France, Philippe de Bell, who had hitherto been the friend of the Templars, now became alarmed and urged the Pope to take action against them. But before the Pope was able to find out more about the matter, the king took the law into his own hands and had all the Templars in France arrested on October 13th, 1307. The following charges were then brought against them by the Inquisitor for France before whom they were examined. Charge 1. The ceremony of the initiation into the order was accompanied by insults to the cross, the denial of Christ, and gross obscenities. The adoration of an idol, which was said to be the image of the true God. Remember, we looked at quotes about the idol. It's like this woman's head, Sophia, very strange. The omission of the words of consecration at Mass. The right that the lay chiefs arrogated to themselves of giving absolution. The authorization of unnatural vice. So really quick pause. These were an order of men claiming to be Christians, claiming to fight in the name of Christ, and yet were worshiping the devil in secret. Synagogue of Satan. To all these infamies, a great number of the knights, including Jacques de Molay, confessed in almost precisely the same terms. At their admission into the order, they said they had been shown the cross on which was the figure of Christ and had been asked whether they believed in him. When they answered yes, they were told in some cases that this was wrong because he was not God. He was a false prophet Some added that they were then shown an idol or a bearded head which they were told to worship. One added that this was of such a terrible aspect that it seemed to him to be the face of some devil called in French un mof, and that whenever he saw it, he was so overcome with fear that he could hardly look at it without fear and trembling. All who confessed declared that they had been ordered to spit on the crucifix. Sorry for this language, but it's you have to expose the works of darkness. And very many that they had received the injunction to commit obscenities and to practice unnatural vice. Some said that on their refusal to carry out these orders, they had been threatened with imprisonment, even perpetual imprisonment. A few said that they had actually been incarcerated. One declared that he had been terrorized, seized by the throat, and threatened with death. Since, however, a number of these confessions were made under torture, it is more important to consider the evidence provided by the trial of the knights at the hands of the Pope, where this method was not employed. Now, at the time the Templars were arrested, Clement V, deeply resenting the king's interference with an order which existed entirely under papal jurisdiction, wrote in the strongest terms of remonstrance to Philippe de Bell, urging their release, and even after their trial, neither the confessions of the knights nor the angry expostulations of the king could persuade him to believe in their guilt. But as the scandal concerning the knights was increasing, he consented to receive in private audience a certain knight of the order of great nobility and held by the said order in no slight esteem, who testified to the abominations that took place on the reception of the brethren, the spitting on the cross, the other things which were not lawful nor, humanly speaking, decent. The Pope then decided to hold an examination of the 72 French knights at Poitiers in order to discover whether the confessions made by them before the Inquisitor at Paris could be substantiated, and at this examination conducted without torture or pressure of any kind in the presence of the Pope himself. The witnesses declared on oath, that they would tell the truth and the full and pure truth. They then made confessions which were committed to writing in their presence, and these being afterwards read aloud to them, they expressly and willingly approved them, and so on. Besides this, an examination of the Grand Master Jacques de Molay and the preceptors of the order was held in the presence of 3 cardinals and 4 public notaries, and many other good men. These witnesses, says the official report, having sworn with their hands on the gospel of God, that, quote, they would on all aforesaid things speak the pure and full truth, they, separately, freely, and spontaneously, without any coercion and fear, deposed and confessed, among other things, the denial of Christ and spitting upon the cross when they were received into the order of the temple. And some of them deposed and confessed that under the same form, namely with the denial of Christ and spitting on the cross, they had received many brothers into the order. Some of them, too, confessed certain other horrible and disgusting things on which we were silent. Besides this, they said that they confessed that those things which are contained in the confessions and depositions of heretical depravity, which they made lately before the Inquisitor of Paris, were true. Their confessions, being again committed to writing, were approved by the witnesses, who then, with bended knees and many tears, asked for an obtained absolution. The Pope, however, still refused to take action against the whole order, merely because the master and brethren around him had gravely sinned, and it was decided to hold a papal commission in Paris. The first sitting took place in November 1309, when the Grand Master and 231 knights were summoned before the pontifical commissioners. This inquiry, says Michelet, was conducted slowly with much consideration and gentleness by high ecclesiastical dignitaries and an archbishop, several bishops, etc. But although a number of the knights, including the Grand Master, now retracted their admissions, some damning confessions were again forthcoming. It's impossible within the scope of this book to follow the many trials of the Templars that took place in different countries. In Italy, at Ravenna, Pisa, Bologna, and Florence, where torture was not employed and blasphemies were admitted, or in Germany, where torture was employed but no confessions were made and a verdict was given in favor of the order. A few details concerning the trial in England may, however, be of interest, and there's some stuff here. I think there was some more that I was going to read. But you can see so far the thread, the satanic thread of the Synagogue of Satan. I think that was it. Let's see, page down. Yeah, that's it. So there's more to this. Of course, there's a lot to read on the Templars and their history, but let's put it all together. Catholic apologists will deny that the Templars were involved in the occult. But the evidence proves otherwise, folks. The evidence proves otherwise. Satan threaded the mystery religion into the counterfeit church with the Pope through centuries of movements through secret societies, esoteric schools, taking one group and cross-pollinating with another. Every time there's a judgment, using the opportunity to bridge to the next thing, constantly jumping from platform to platform. Just like how Alexandria used to be the seat of a cult with the Library of Alexandria and it burned down, and then all those things fled upward into Rome, all these things moved through various groups and people and were integrated into the counterfeit church. Because remember, Satan gave his throne and power and great authority to the man of sin, meaning all things need to be integrated into this reality over time. In the same way, like I said, with cross-pollination, you can see throughout from Persia, or from Babylon to Persia to Greece to Rome, and then eventually the Roman Catholic Church, all these things are constantly moved from one point to another. This is why the Roman Catholic Church is the wealthiest, why it's the center of all the occult knowledge, and why it has authority over all the world. Of course, authority that God has given it, but nevertheless, understanding the importance of the Knights Templar is very significant for this journey, because the Knights Templar are a focal point in history for many reasons. They're one of the first major Catholic orders / secret societies that were basically doing one thing on the surface. Oh, we're helping people, we're helping people, pilgrims come to Jerusalem. But in fact, they were actually making a ton of money. They created international banking. They were worshiping the devil. They were doing all sorts of illicit things. So Synagogue of Satan. They also inherited the mystery religion from other sources like the Kabbalah, like the Assassins, like the Eastern mystics, and so on. They also influenced the development of Freemasonry, which we will document in just a second, which of course had its impact on other secret societies, and they also set the blueprint for the Jesuits. They made a lot of money, just like the Jesuits would later make with their reductions, and they hoarded it all for illicit activities. You saw when Jacques de Molay came to meet the Pope, he had 150,000 gold florins. They were just incredibly wealthy from there's various conquests, people donating a ton of money because they thought they were virtuous. This is, the mystery religion just basically parading around as something noble, but in fact, it's actually super evil. And of course, they also turned their wealth, like I said, into international banking, which set the stage for other future things like the Jesuits and the Rothschilds. And they continued the mystery schools, the mystery religion, under the guise of Christianity. They also had bastard Jewish children through the Crusades and raping women there and basically having illegitimate children that were neither here nor there. And those children ended up being crypto-Jews, and they were also being used for other things, like if you've read Children's Crusade by George Zabriskie, I put a link for it in the references for this particular presentation, but in 1096, the Crusaders had many illegitimate children with the Jews, and they were making kids that were basically ostracized by both Catholic and Jewish cultures. Then they used these kids to launch more crusades to try to convert the Muslim world. Supposedly, around 100,000 kids marched towards Jerusalem, and a lot of them died, unfortunately. It's so sad. It's just so sad to basically try to, that's what Satan does. Put the children first. Oh, there you go. Just like they do with this, with all this stuff today, like with Tranny Time Story Hour, and we got to put our Bibles back in school because save the kids from Moloch. And of course, you should save the kids from Moloch, but the point is that the solution being offered to you is using children as a way to manipulate your emotions, which is nothing new under the sun. Nothing new under the sun. So look into the Children's Crusade. It's a very fascinating bit of history. It's very fascinatingly sad, unfortunately, but nevertheless. So now let's look at the Templar Freemason connection. This is from, what's the website here? I think it's history also. Is it? Yeah, history.uk. History.co.uk again. Templar Freemason connection. Let's read a little bit about it. Freemasonry is a fraternal organization which developed out of the guilds of actual working stonemasons, known as operative masons, in the Middle Ages. These were highly skilled men who would travel long distances to build cathedrals and other landmarks, with early lodges being set up on building sites to accommodate them. Over the centuries, the era of operative masons began to wane, and slowly the guilds began to take in distinguished people who were not stonecutters and builders. These members became known as speculative masons. Exactly when and how the organization went from being made up of literal operative masons to allegorical speculative masons is still a matter of debate. But the era of speculative masonry as we know it today, a semi-secretive organization of well-connected men, began in 1717 when a cluster of London lodges gathered in a tavern to create the first Grand Lodge. So where did the Templars come in? A gulf of time certainly separates the end of the age of the Templars and the advent of speculative masonry. The fall of the chivalric order began with the mass arrests of French Templars on October 13, 1307, an infamous date thought by some to have inspired the Friday the 13th superstition. The knights were accused of idolatry, blasphemous rituals, and sexual deviance, and the Grand Master of the Templars was among those who was burnt alive. Can you imagine? Being burnt alive, then you're resurrected and thrown again into the lake of fire. That's the way to go. The order was eventually extinguished in 1312, many generations before the Freemasons emerged as a secret society of thinkers and influencers. However, it's been speculated that some of the knights escaped the savaging of their order to lay down roots elsewhere. Historians have mused over a tantalizing confession given by one Templar, Jean de Chalon, who alleged that some members of the order in Paris were given word of the crackdown and managed to slip away on ships to parts unknown. Jean de Chalon's story has been dismissed by some scholars as highly unreliable, as it was presumably given while the luckless knight was being tortured. But what if it's true? Stories have persisted about these fleeing Templars finding sanctuary in Scotland, with some 18th century Scots alleging that the members of the order had brought secret treasure from the Holy Land with them. And secret knowledge, too. One such account came from the Scottish exile in Germany named George Frederick Johnson. As the historian Peter Partner, author of The Murdered Magicians, Templars, and Their Myth, tells us, Johnson played a key role in changing the way we imagine Templars, from unlearned and fanatical soldier monks to that of the enlightened and wise knightly seers, who had used their sojourn in the East to recover its profoundest secrets. This romanticization of the Templars as seekers of holy truths and holy relics, included the Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant, has been a mainstay of pop culture. But the Scottish connection also, in some people's minds, ties the Templars in with the Freemasons. After all, Scotland was the earliest speculative lodges were formed, centuries before London hosted the first Grand Lodge meeting in 1717. Many have attempted to piece together a link between the Templars who allegedly settled in Scotland and fought alongside Robert the Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn, according to lore, and the earliest Freemasons. A particularly significant site for those who believe in this link is Rosslyn Chapel in Midlothian, known to millions as a key location in Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. The chapel is famed for its many intricate carvings, some apparently being Templar and Masonic symbols. Could the chapel have been the repository of the fabled Templar treasures smuggled out of France on the eve of the mass arrests? And do the carvings imply a kind of cross-pollination between the exiled knights and the Scottish Masons? The time frame doesn't seem to back up this version of events, as construction began on the Rosslyn Chapel in the 15th century, long after the fall of Templars. However, some have speculated that prior to the alleged treasures being kept at Rosslyn, the exiled Templars originally sought refuge at another site, Kilwinning Abbey in Ayrshire. Unlike Rosslyn, this structure did exist at the time of the Templars' fall. Fascinatingly, Kilwinning is also home to the Lodge Mother Kilwinning, reckoned to be the oldest Masonic lodge in the world. Kilwinning was therefore been identified as the place where Templars and operative Masons potentially came into contact. So, did they come into contact? I will let you decide. Let's see if we can read another one about the origins of Freemasonry. This is also, again, from Heritage History, Secret Societies and the Subversive Movements by Nesta Webster. This is on the origins of Freemasonry. This enumeration is, however, misleading, for it implies that in one of these various theories, the true origin of Freemasonry may be found. In reality, modern Freemasonry is a dual system, a blend of two distinct traditions of operative Masonry, and that is to say the actual art of building, and of speculative Masonry, on the greater truths of life and death. As a well-known Freemason, the Count Goblet de Alvilla has expressed it, quote, "Speculative Masonry, that is to say the dual system we now know as Freemasonry, is the legitimate offspring of a fruitful union between the professional guild of medieval Masons and of a secret group of philosophical adepts, the first having furnished the form and the second the spirit. In studying the origins of the present system, we have therefore, 1, to examine separately the history of each of these two traditions, and 2, to discover their point of junction. Operative Masonry. Beginning with the first of these two traditions, we find the guilds of working Masons existing in very ancient times. Without going back as far as ancient Egypt or Greece, which would be beyond the scope of the present work, the course of these associations may be traced through the history of Western Europe from the beginning of the Christian era, which, really quick pause, you know by now that this goes back to the Garden of Eden. And it just leapfrogs through history. As God judges one group, Satan moves it to the next, and so on. According to the certain Masonic writers, the Druids originally came from Egypt and brought with them traditions relating to the art of building. I wonder what other traditions they brought. The Chaldees, who later on established schools and colleges in this country for the teaching of arts, sciences, and handicrafts, are said to have derived from the Druids. But a more probable source of inspiration in the art of building are the Romans, who established the famous collegia of architects referred to in the list of alternative theories given in the Masonic Cyclopedia. Advocates of the Roman collegia origin of the Freemasonry might be right as far as operative masonry is concerned, for it is to be the period following the Roman occupation of Britain that our Masonic guilds can, with the greatest degree of certainty, be traced. So it was influenced by the fourth beast, Rome. Owing to the importance of the art of the building now acquired, it is said that many distinguished men such as St. Alban, King Alfred, King Edwin, and King Athelstan were numbered amongst its patrons, so that in time the guilds came to occupy the position of privileged bodies and were known as free corporations. Further, that York was the first Masonic center in England, largely under the control of the Chaldees, who at the same period exercised much influence over the Masonic collegia in Scotland at Kilwinning, Melrose, and Aberdeen. Remember Kilwinning, because that's where they made contact. But it must be remembered that all of this is speculation. No documentary evidence has been produced to prove the existence of Masonic guilds before the famous York Charter of AD 936. And even the date of this document is doubtful. Only with the period of Gothic architecture do we reach firm ground. That guilds of working masons known as in France as Compagnonages, probably totally pronouncing that wrong, and in Germany as Steinmetzen, did then form close corporations and possibly possess secrets connected with their profession is more than probable. That, in consequence of their skill in building the magnificent cathedrals of this period, they now came to occupy a privileged position seems fairly certain. The Abbé Grandidier, writing from Strasbourg in 1778, traces the whole system of Freemasonry from the German guilds. Quote, "This much vaunted society of Freemasons is nothing but a servile imitation of an ancient and useful confrérie of real Masons, whose headquarters was formerly at Strasbourg, and which the Constitution was confirmed by the Emperor Maximilian in 1498. As far as it is possible to discover from the scanty documentary evidence that the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries provide, the same privileges appear to have been accorded to the guilds of working Masons in England and Scotland, which, although presided over by powerful nobles and apparently on occasion admitting members from outside the craft, remained essentially operative bodies. Nevertheless, we find the assemblies of Masons suppressed by Act of Parliament in the beginning of the reign of Henry VI, and later on an armed force sent by Queen Elizabeth to break up the annual Grand Lodge at York. It is possible that the fraternity, merely by the secrecy with which it was surrounded, excited the suspicions of the authority, for nothing could be more law-abiding than its published statutes. Masons were to be true men to God and the Holy Church. Also to the masters that they served. They were to be honest in their manner of life and to do villainy, whereby the craft or the science may be slandered. Yet the 17th century writer Plot, in his Natural History of Staffordshire, expresses some suspicion with regard to the secrets of Freemasonry. That these could not be merely trade secrets relating to the art of building, but that already some speculative element had been introduced to the lodges, seems the more probable from the fact that by the middle of the 17th century, not only noble patrons headed the craft, but ordinary gentlemen entirely unconnected with building were received into the fraternity. The well-known entry in the diary of Elias Ashmole under the date of October 16, 1646, clearly proves this is a fact. Quote, "I was made a Freemason at Warrington in Lancashire with Colonel Henry Mainwaring of Cartishcombe in Cheshire. The names of those that were then of the lodge, Mr. Rich Penkett Warden, Mr. James Collier, Mr. Rich Stanky, Henry Littler, John Elam Rich, Elam, and Hugh Brewer. It is now ascertained, says Yarker, that the majority of the members present there were not operative Masons." This was in the 1700s, 1600s actually, middle 1600s. Again, in 1682, Ashmole writes that he attended a meeting held at Mason Hall in London, where, with a number of other gentlemen, he was admitted into the fellowship of the Freemasons, that is to say, into the second degree. We have then clear proof that already in the 17th century, Freemasonry had ceased to be an association composed exclusively of men concerned with building, although eminent architects ranked high in the order. Inigo Jones is said to have been Grand Master under James I, and Sir Christopher Wren to have occupied the same position from about 1685 to 1702. But it was not until 1703 that the Lodge of St. Paul in London officially announced that privileges of masonry should no longer be restricted to operative masons, but extend to men of various professions, provided that they were regularly approved and initiated into the order. Notice how the name of the lodge is St. Paul. It's got a Christian name on it, but yet they're doing something else. This was followed in 1717 by the great coup d'etat when Grand Lodge was found, and speculative masonry, which we now know as Freemasonry, was established on a settled basis with a ritual, rules, and constitution drawn up in due form. It is the important date that the official history of Freemasonry begins, which I believe the Constitution of the Freemasons was written by Francis Bacon, who also contributed to basically polishing the KJV. We talk about that in the KJV only PSYOP. And I learned recently while I was doing the Israelite PSYOP that King James, who was King James I, who was the one who the King James Bible, was also a believer in white Israelism, tying his bloodline back to David and that the white Anglos were the chosen people and so on. So nothing new under the sun, folks. Synagogue. But before pursuing the course of the order through what is known as the Grand Lodge era, it is necessary to go back and inquire into the origins of philosophy that was now combined with the system of operative masonry. This is the point on which opinions are divided and to which the various theories summarized in the Masonic Cyclopedia relate. Let us examine each of these in turn. Speculative masonry. According to certain skeptics concerning the mysteries of Freemasonry, the system inaugurated in 1717 had no existence before that date, but was devised, promulgated, and palmed upon the world by Dr. de Sauguliers, Dr. Anderson, and others who then founded the Grand Lodge of England. Mr. Patton, in an admirable little pamphlet, has shown the futility of this contention and also the injustice of representing the founders of the Grand Lodge as perpetrating so gross a deception. This 1717 theory ascribes to men of the highest character the invention of a system of a mere imposture. It was brought forward with pretensions, which its framers knew to be false pretensions of high antiquity, whereas it had newly been invented in their studies. Is this likely, or is it reasonable to ascribe such conduct to honorable men without even assigning a probable motive for it? We have indeed only to study Masonic ritual, which is open to everyone to read, in order to arrive at the same conclusion, that there would be no motive for this imposture, and further that these two clergymen cannot be supposed to have evolved the whole thing out of their heads. Obviously, some movement of a kindred nature must have led up to this crisis. And since Elias Ashmole's diary clearly proves that a ceremony of Masonic initiation had existed in the preceding century, remember the one from the 1600s, where he was surrounded by people that weren't builders, it is surely only reasonable to conclude that Dr. Anderson and de Sauguliers revised but not originated the ritual and constitutions drawn up by them. Now, although the ritual of Freemasonry is couched in modern and by no means classical English, the ideas running through it certainly bear traces of extreme antiquity. The central idea of Freemasonry concerning a loss which has befallen man and the hope of its ultimate recovery is in fact no other than the ancient secret tradition described in the first chapter of this book. Certain Masonic writers indeed ascribe Freemasonry precisely the same genealogy as that of the early Kabbalah, declaring that it descended from Adam and the first patriarchs of the human race, and thence through groups of wise men amongst the Egyptians, Chaldeans, Persians, Greeks. Mr. Albert Churchward insists particularly on the Egyptian origin of the speculative element in Freemasonry. Quote, Brother Gould and other Freemasons will never understand the meaning and origin of our sacred tenets till they have studied and unlocked the mysteries of the past. That's right, you have to understand where things come from so you can see where they're going, folks, because there is nothing new under the sun. And the Bible makes it so simple for you, it really does. This study will then reveal the fact that the Druids, the Gymnosophists of India, the Magi of Persia, and the Chaldeans of Assyria had all the same religious rites and ceremonies as practiced by their priests who were initiated to their order, and that these solemnly sworn to keep the doctrines as a profound secret from the rest of mankind. All of these flowed from one source, Egypt. Mr. Churchward further quotes the speech of Reverend Dr. William Dodd at the opening of a Masonic temple in 1794, who traced Freemasonry from the first astronomers on the plains of Chaldea, the wise and mystic kings, priests of Egypt, the sages of Greece, and philosophers of Rome. But how did these traditions descend to the Masons of the West? According to a large body of Masonic opinion in this country, which recognizes only a single source of inspiration to the system we now know as Freemasonry, the speculative as well as the operative traditions of the order descended from the building guilds and were imported to England by means of the Roman Collegia, which was basically part of the Roman Empire. Mr. Churchward, however, strongly dissents from this view. In the new and revised edition of the Perfect Ceremonies, according to our working, a theory is given that Freemasonry originated from certain guilds of workmen, which were well known in history as the Roman College of Artificers. There is no foundation of fact for such a theory. Freemasonry is now, and always is, an eschatology, as many may be proved by the whole of our signs, symbols, words, and our rituals. But what Mr. Churchward fails to explain is how this eschatology reached the working Masons. Moreover, why, if he asserts it derived from Egypt, Assyria, India, and Persia, Freemasonry no longer bears the stamp of these countries. For although vestiges of Sabiism may be found in the decoration of the lodges and brief references to the mysteries of Egypt and Phoenicia, to the secret teachings of Pythagoras, to Euclid, and to Plato in the ritual and instructions of the craft degrees, nevertheless the form in which the ancient tradition is clothed, the phraseology and passwords employed are neither Egyptian, Chaldean, Greek, nor Persian, but Judaic. We're going to look at some examples of that coming up after this. Although some portion of the ancient secret tradition may have penetrated to Great Britain through the Druids or the Romans, versed in the lore of Greece and Egypt, another channel for this introduction was clearly the Kabbalah of the Jews. Certain Masonic writers recognize this double tradition, the one descending from Egypt, Chaldea, and Greece, i.e. the mystery religion, and another from the Israelites, and assert that it is from the latter source their system is derived. So, cross-pollinating the mystery religion with a counterfeit of God's people. Synagogue of Satan. Where were we here? For after tracing its origin from Adam, Noah, Enoch, and Abraham, they proceeded to show its line of descent through Moses, David, and Solomon. Descent from Solomon is in fact officially recognized by the craft and forms a part of the instructions to candidates for initiation into the first degree. Yeah, you'll see they're obsessed with Solomon's temple and the Ark of the Covenant and all this kind of stuff. But as we have already seen, this is the precise genealogy attributed to the Kabbalah by the Jews. Moreover, modern Freemasonry is entirely built upon the Solomonic, or rather the Hiramic legend. For the sake of readers unfamiliar with the ritual of Freemasonry, a brief resume of this grand legend must be given here. Pay attention to this legend and how it's the same old thing as Nimrod and Semiramis and Osiris and everything else. This is a legend. Solomon, when building his temple, employed the services of a certain artificer in brass named Hiram, the son of a widow of the tribe of Naphtali, who was sent to him by Hiram, king of Tyre. So much we know from the Book of Kings, but the Masonic legend goes on to relate that Hiram, the widow's son, referred to as Hiram Abif and described as the master builder, met with an untimely end. For the purpose of preserving order, the masons working on the temple were divided into 3 classes: entered apprentices, fellow crafts, and master masons. The first 2 distinguished by different passwords and grips and paid at different rates of wages. The last consisting only of 3 persons: Solomon himself, Hiram, king of Tyre, who had provided him with wood and precious stones, and Hiram Abif. Now, before the completion of the temple, 15 of the fellow crafts conspired together to find out the secrets of the master masons and resolved to waylay Hiram Abif at the door of the temple. At the last moment, 12 of the 15 drew back, but the remaining 3 carried out the fell design, and after threatening Hiram in vain in order to obtain the secrets, killed him with 3 blows on the head, delivering by each in turn. They then conveyed the body away and buried it on the Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, the same mountain where Abraham offers Isaac as a type and shadow of Jesus. Solomon, informed of the disappearance of the master builder, sent out 15 fellow crafts to seek for him. 5 of these, having arrived at the mountain, noticed a place where the earth had been disturbed, and there discovered the body of Hiram. Leaving a branch of acacia to mark the spot, they returned with their story to Solomon, who ordered them to go and exhume the body, an order that was immediately carried out. The murder and exhumation or raising of Hiram, accompanied by extraordinary lamentations, formed the climax of craft masonry, and when it is remembered that in all probability no such tragedy ever took place, that possibly no one known as Hiram Abiff ever existed, the whole story can only be regarded as the survival of some ancient cult relating to not to an actual event, but to an esoteric doctrine. Yeah, just like the death of Nimrod, just like the resurrection that they're counterfeiting through all these Osiris and Isis and Horus and everybody, all the mystery stuff. It's nothing new under the sun. This is just a repackaging using things from the Bible, but making things up. A legend and a ceremony of this kind is indeed to be found in many earlier mythologies. The story of the murder of Hiram had been foreshadowed by the Egyptian legend of the murder of Osiris and the quest for his body by Isis, whilst the lamentations around the tomb of Hiram had a counterpart in the morning of ceremonies for Osiris and Adonis, just like Tammuz. Both, like Hiram, subsequently raised, and then later on in that which took place around the catafalque of Mainz, who, like Hiram, was barbarously put to death and is said to have been known to the Manichaeans as the son of the widow. Again, just the counterfeit gospel, folks, from zero all the way to the end is a counterfeit gospel. But in the form given to it by Freemasonry, the legend is purely Judaic, and would therefore appear to have derived from the Judaic version of the ancient tradition. The pillars of the temple, Jachin and Boaz, which play so important a part in craft masonry, are symbols which occur in Jewish Kabbalah, where they are described as 2 of the 10 Sephiroths. A writer of the 18th century, referring to the 5 curiosities has discovered in Scotland, describes one as the following. Quote, "The Mason word, which though some make a mystery of it," this is Old English, "I will not conceal a little of what I know. It's like a rabbinical tradition in way of comment of Jachin and Boaz, the 2 pillars erected in Solomon's temple, with an addition delivered from hand to hand, by which they know and become familiar with one another." This is precisely the system by which the Kabbalah was handed down amongst the Jews. The Jewish Encyclopedia lends color to the theory of Kabbalistic transmission by suggesting that the story of Hiram may possibly be traced back to the rabbinic legend concerning the Temple of Solomon, that while all the workmen were killed so that they should not build another temple devoted to idolatry, Hiram himself was raised to heaven like Enoch. Myths and fairy tales. How did this rabbinic legend find its way into Freemasonry? Advocates of the Roman Collegia theory explain it in the following manner. After the building of the Temple of Solomon, the masons who had been engaged in the work were dispersed, and a number made their way to Europe, some to Marseille, some perhaps to Rome, where they may have introduced Judaic legends to the Collegia, which then passed on to the Comacchini masters of the 7th century, and from these to the medieval working guilds of England, France, and Germany. The devil's been very busy, folks. It is said that during the Middle Ages, a story concerning the Temple of Solomon was current amongst the Compagnons of France, in one of these groups known as the Children of Solomon. The legend of Hiram appears to have existed much in its present form. According to another group, the victim of the murderer was not Hiram Abiff, but one of his companions named Maitre Jacques, who, whilst engaged with Hiram on the construction of the temple, met his death at the hands of 5 wicked fellow crafts, instigated by a 6th, the Père Soubise. But the date at which this legend originated is unknown. Clavel thinks that the Hebraic mysteries existed as early as the Roman Collegia, which he describes as largely Judaized. Yarker expresses precisely the opposite view. Quote, "It is not so difficult to connect Freemasonry with the Collegia, the Roman Collegia. The difficulty lies in attributing Jewish traditions to the Collegia. And we say, on the evidence of the oldest charges, that such traditions had no existence in Saxon times. Again, so far as this country is concerned, we know nothing from the documents of a masonry dating from Solomon's temple until after the Crusades, when the constitution believed to have been sanctioned by the King Athelstan gradually underwent a change. In a discussion which took place recently at the Quattuor Coronati Lodge in the Hiramic legend, could only be traced back, and then without absolute certainty, to the 14th century, which would coincide with the date indicated by Yarker. Up to this period of lore, Up to this period, the lore of the Masonic guilds appears to have contained only the exoteric doctrines of Egypt and Greece, which may have reached them through the Roman collegia, whilst the traditions of the Masonry were traced from Adam, Jabal, Tubal-Cain from Nimrod and the Tower of Babel, with Hermes and Pythagoras as their more immediate progenitors. These doctrines were evidently in the main geometrical or technical and in no sense Kabbalistic. There is therefore some justification for Eckart's statement that the, quote, the Judeo-Christian mysteries were not yet introduced into the Masonic corporations. Nowhere can we find at least the least trace of them. Nowhere do we find any classification, not even that of masters, fellow crafts, and apprentices. We observe no symbol of the Temple of Solomon. All their symbolism relates to Masonic labors and to a few philosophical maxims of morality. The date at which Eckhart, like Yarker, places the introduction of these Judaic elements is the time of the Crusades. Judaic elements, Crusades, what happened around that time? But whilst recognizing that modern craft masonry is largely founded on the Kabbalah, it is necessary to distinguish between the different Kabbalias. For by this date, no less than 3 Kabbalias appear to have existed. Firstly, the ancient secret tradition of the patriarchs handed down from the Egyptians through the Greeks and Romans, and possibly through the Roman collegia to the craft masons of Britain. Secondly, the Jewish version of this tradition, the first Kabbalah of the Jews, in no way compatible with Christianity, descending from Moses, David. And of course, this doesn't actually come from Moses, but that's their tradition. David and Solomon to the Essenes and more enlightened Jews. And thirdly, the perverted Kabbalah, mingled by the rabbis with magic, barbaric superstitions, and after the death of Christ with anti-Christian legends. Whatever Kabbalistic elements were introduced into craft masonry at the time of the Crusades appeared to have belonged to the second of these traditions, the unperverted Kabbalah of the Jews known to the Essenes. There are, in fact, striking resemblances between Freemasonry and Essenism, degrees of initiation, oaths of secrecy, the wearing of an apron, and a certain Masonic sign, whilst to the Sabaeus traditions of the Essenes may perhaps be traced the solar and stellar symbolism of the lodges. The Hiramic legend may have belonged to the same tradition. The Templar tradition. Now we can string it together. If then no documentary evidence can be brought forward to show that either the Solomonic legend or any traces of Judaic symbolism and traditions existed either in the monuments of the period or in the ritual of the Masons before the 14th century, it is surely reasonable to recognize the plausibility of the contention put forward by a great number of Masonic writers, particularly on the continent, that the Judaic elements penetrated into Masonry by means of the Templars. The Templars, as we have already seen, had taken their name from the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. What then more likely than that during the time that they had lived there, they had learnt the rabbinical legends connected with the temple? According to George Sand, who is deeply versed in the history of secret societies, the Hiramic legend was adopted by the Templars as symbolic of the destruction of their order. They wept over their impotence in the person of Hiram. The word lost and recovered is their empire. The Freemason Regan likewise declares that the catastrophe that they lamented was the catastrophe that destroyed their order. Further, the Grand Master whose fate was deplored was Jacques de Molay. Here, then, we have 2 bodies in France at the same period, the Templars and the Compagnones. I'm totally pronouncing that wrong. Both possessing a legend concerning the Temple of Solomon, and both mourning a Maitre Jacques who had been barbarously put to death. If we accept the possibility that the Hiramic legend existed amongst the Masons before the Crusades, how are we to explain this extraordinary coincidence? It is certainly easier to believe that the Judaic traditions were introduced to the Masons by the Templars and grafted on to the ancient lore that the Masonic guilds had inherited from the Roman collegia. So the Masonic guilds were influenced by the Roman collegiate, pagan Rome, but then eventually Catholic Rome was influenced by Rabbinic Judaism, threaded that thread in through the Crusades, and the Templars were judged, of course, and so some of them fled away, and so those things cross-pollinated back into the Freemasons and created basically speculative masonry, which is the occult secret society version that we have today. It's not building related. Fascinating stuff. That some connection existed between the Templars and the working Masons is indicated by the new influence that entered into building at this period. A modern Freemason comparing the beautifully designed and deep cut marks of the true Gothic period, say circa 1150 to 1350, with the careless and roughly executed marks, many of them were scratches of later periods, points out that the Knights Templars rose and fell with that wonderful development of architecture. The same writer goes on to show that some of the most important Masonic symbols, the equilateral triangle and the Mason square surmounting two pillars, came through from Gothic times. Yarker asserts that the level, the flaming star, and the Tau cross, which have since passed into the symbolism of Freemasonry, may be traced to the Knights Templar, as also the five-pointed star in Salisbury Cathedral, the double triangle in Westminster Abbey, Jachin and Boaz, the circle and the pentagon in the Freemasonry of the 14th century. Yarker cites later in 1556 the eye and the crescent moon, the three stars, and the ladder of the 5 steps as further evidence of Templar influence. The Templars were large builders, and Jacques de Molay alleged the zeal of his order in decorating churches in the process against him in 1310. Hence, the alleged connection of Templary and Freemasonry is bound to have substratum of truth, to have some truth there. Moreover, according to a Masonic tradition, an alliance definitely took place between the Templars and the Masonic guilds at this period. During the proceedings taken against the Order of the Temple in France, it is said that the Pierre du Amont and the 7 other knights escaped to Scotland in the guise of working masons and landed in the island of Mull. On St. John's Day, 1307, they held their first chapter. Robert Bruce then took them under his protection, and 7 years later they fought under his standard at Bannockburn against Edward II, who had suppressed their order in England. After this battle, which took place on St. John the Baptist Day in summer, June 24th, Robert Bruce is said to have instituted the Royal Order of HRM, Heirdom, and the Knights of the Rosy Cross. You've heard that one before, the Rosicrucians. These 2 degrees now constitute the Royal Order of Scotland, and it seems not improbable that in reality they were brought to Scotland by the Templars. Thus, according to one of the early writers of Freemasonry, the degrees of the Rose Cross originated with the Templars in Palestine as early as 1188, whilst the eastern origin of the word Heirdom, supposedly to derive from a mythical mountain on an island south of Hebrides, where the Chaldees practiced their rites, is indicated by another 18th century writer who traces to a Jewish source. In this same year of 1314, Robert Bruce is said to have united the Templars and the Royal Order of HRM with the guilds of working masons who had also fought in his army at the famous Lodge of Kilwinning. There it is. Told you to remember that. Founded in 1286, which now added to its name that of Heirdom and became the chief seat of the order. Scotland was essentially a home of the operative masonry, and in view of the Templars' prowess in the art of building, what more natural than the 2 bodies should enter into an alliance? Already in England, the Temple is said between 1155 and 1199 to have administered the craft. It is thus at Heirdom of Kilwinning, quote, the Holy House of Masonry, Mother Kilwinning, as it is still known to Freemasons today, that a speculative element of a fresh kind may have found its way into the lodges. Is it not here, then, that we may see that the fruitful union between the professional guild of medieval masons and a secret group of philosophical adepts, alluded to by Count Goblet de Avelia earlier when I read it to you, and described by Mr. Waite in the following words, quote, the mystery of the building guilds, whatever it may be held to have been, was that of a simple, unpolished, pious, and utilitarian device. And this daughter of nature, interesting it says daughter, in the absence of all intention on her own part, underwent or was coerced into one of the strangest marriages which has been celebrated in occult history. It so happened that her particular form and figure lent itself to such a union. A daughter. So interesting to study these things, and because they have to testify to the truth one way or another. A daughter of Mystery Babylon. Mr. Waite, with his usual vagueness, does not explain when and where this marriage took place, but the account could certainly apply to the alliance between the Templars and the Scottish guilds of working masons, which, as we have seen, is admitted by Masonic authorities and presents exactly the conditions described, the Templars being peculiarly fitted by their initiation into the legend concerning the building of the Temple of Solomon to cooperate with the Masons, and the Masons being prepared by their partial initiation into the mysteries to receive the fresh influx of Eastern tradition from the Templars. Peas in a pod. A further indication of the Templar influence in the craft masonry is the system of degrees and initiations. The names of entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason are said to have derived from Scotland, and the analogy between these and the degrees of assassins has already been shown. We looked at that with the assassins cross-pollinating over. Indeed, the resemblance between the outer organization of Freemasonry and the system of the Ishmaelis is shown by many writers. Thus, Dr. Bussell observes, no doubt together with some knowledge of geometry, regarded as an esoteric trade secret, many symbols today current did pass down from very primitive times. But a more certain model was the Grand Lodge of the Ishmaelis in Cairo. That is to say, the Dar-ul-Hikmat. Syed Amir Ali also expresses this opinion that Makrisi's account of the different degrees of initiation adopted in this lodge forms an invaluable record of Freemasonry. Remember, the secret societies took over Islam immediately after Muhammad died. So there's nothing new under the sun. In fact, the lodge at Cairo became the model of all the lodges created afterwards in Christendom. Mr. Bernard Springett, a Freemason quoting this passage, adds, "In this last assertion, I am myself greatly in agreement." It is surely therefore legitimate to surmise that this system penetrated to craft masonry through the Templars, whose connection with the assassins, offshoot of the Dar-ul-Hikmat, was a matter of common knowledge. The question of the Templar succession in Freemasonry forms perhaps the most controversial point in the whole story of the Roman Collegia theory. Continental Masons more generally accept it, and even glory in it. Mackey, in his Lexicon of Freemasonry, thus sums up the matter. Quote, "The connection between the Knights Templar and the Freemasons has been repeatedly asserted by the enemies of both institutions, and has often been admitted by their friends. Laurie, on this subject, holds the following language. We know that the Knights Templar not only possessed the mysteries, but performed the ceremonies and inculcated the duties of the Freemasons. And he attributes the dissolution of the order to the discovery of their being Freemasons and their assembling in secret to practice the rites of the order. This explains why Freemasons have always shown indulgence to the Templars." Quote, "It was above all Freemasonry," says Findel, "which, because it falsely held itself to be a daughter of Templarism," there's that word again, daughter, can't make it up, man, "took the greatest pains to represent the order of Templars as innocent and therefore free from all mystery. For this purpose, not only legends and unhistorical facts were brought forward, but maneuvers were also resorted to in order to suppress the truth. The Masonic reverers of the Temple Order bought up the whole edition of the Actes du Procès of Moldenhauer, because this showed the guilt of the order. Only a few copies reached the booksellers. Already several decades before, the Freemasons in their unhistorical efforts had been guilty of real forgery. Dupuy had published his History of the Trial of the Templars as early as 1654 in Paris, for which he had made use of the original Actes du Procès, according to which the guilt of the order leaves no room for doubt. But when, in the middle of the 18th century, several branches of Freemasonry wished to recall the Templar order into being, the work of Dupuy was naturally very displeasing. It had already been current amongst the public for 100 years, so it could no longer be bought, therefore they falsified it. Accordingly, in 1751, a reprint of Dupuy's work appeared with the addition of a number of notes and remarks and mutilated in such a way as to prove not the guilt but the innocence of the Templars. Now, although British Masonry has played no part in these intrigues, the question of the Templar succession has been very inadequately dealt with by the Masonic writers of our country. As a rule, they have adopted one of the two courses. Either they have persistently denied connection with the Templars, or they have represented them as a blameless and cruelly maligned order. But in reality, neither of these expedients is necessary to save the honor of the British Masonry, for not even the bitterest enemy of Masonry has ever suggested that British Masons have adopted any portion of the Templar heresy. The knights who fled to Scotland may have been perfectly innocent of the charges brought against their order. Indeed, there is good reason to believe this was the case. Thus, the Manuel des Chevaliers de l'Ordre du Temple relates the incident in the following manner. Quote, "After the death of Jacques de Molay, some Scottish Templars, having become apostates at the instigation of Robert Bruce, ranged themselves under the banners of the new order instituted by this prince, and in which the receptions were based on those of the Order of the Temple. It is there that we must seek the origin of Scottish Masonry and even that of the other Masonic rites. The Scottish Templars were excommunicated in 1324 by Larminius, who declared them to be Templi Desertores, deserters, and the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, placed forever outside the pale of the temple. A similar anathema has been launched by several Grand Masters against Templars who were rebellious to legitimate authority. From the schism that was introduced into Scotland, a number of sects took birth." Daughters upon daughters upon daughters, all going to be integrated into the final thing. This account forms a complete exoneration of the Scottish Templars as apostates from the bogus Christian church and the doctrines of Johannism they showed themselves loyal to, the true church and to the Christian faith as formulated in the published statutes of their order. What they appear then to have introduced to Masonry was their manner of reception, that is to say, their outer forms and organization and possibly certain Eastern esoteric doctrines and Judaic legends concerning the building of the Temple of Solomon, in no way incompatible with the teaching of Christianity. Yeah, right. It will be noticed, moreover, that in the ban passed by the Ordre des Temples on the Scottish Templars, the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem are also included. This is a further tribute to the orthodoxy of the Scottish Knights. For the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, to whom the Templar property was given, no suspicion of heresy had ever been attached. After the suppression of the Order of the Temple in 1312, a number of knights joined themselves to the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, by whom the Templar system appears to have been purged of its heretical elements. As we shall see later, the same process is said to have been carried out by the Royal Order of Scotland. All this suggests that the Templars had imported a secret doctrine from the East, which was capable either of a Christian or anti-Christian interpretation. Interesting dualism there. Christian, quote unquote, or anti-Christian interpretation. What does the spirit of Antichrist do? Obviously, anti, as in against Christ, and in place of Christ, as a counterfeit. Interesting that their doctrine had two possible interpretations. That through their connection with the Royal Order of Scotland and the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, this Christian interpretation was preserved, and finally that it was this pure doctrine which passed into Freemasonry. According to early Masonic authorities, the adoption of the two St. Johns as the patron saints of Masonry arose not from Johannism, but from the alliance between the Templars and the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem. It is important to remember that the theory of the Templar connection with Freemasonry was held by the continental Freemasons of the 18th century, who, living at the time the order was reconstituted on its present basis, were clearly in a better position to know its origins than we who are separated from that date by a distance of 200 years. But since their testimony first comes to light at the period of the upper degrees, in which the Templar influence is more clearly visible than in craft masonry, it must be reserved for a later chapter. Before passing on to this further stage in the history of the craft, it is necessary to consider one more link in the chain of the Masonic tradition, the Holy Vem. So, really quick pause before we get to here. You can see traces of Judaizing in these Templar beliefs, but there's no connection between, obviously, the Jews and the Masons, but there is a connection between the Templars and the Jews, and the Templars brought those Judaizing elements into the Freemasons. And there's a lot of cross-pollination and crisscrossing and interaction between the mystery schools of the assassins, the esoteric schools of the East, the Templars picking up all this wealth and power and influence and secret knowledge, being corrupted and then exporting that back to Europe, where would be, the iron mixed with clay, the Holy Roman Empire, all these things, the Catholic Church, all of these things that would eventually transform into the Jesuits and what you have today with the Order of Knights of Malta and so on. Of course, the Knights of Malta have been around for a while, but the point is you can see thread by thread. That's what I want you to see. They all are nothing new under the sun. Leapfrog from one to another, cross-pollinating. It's one spirit of Antichrist, one mystery religion. There's only the gospel and the truth, tree of life, or the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Where God is one and very simple and straightforward, black and white, the devil has a variety of shades of gray, of almost right. Oh, it's almost this, oh, it's almost that, this version of that. It's the same legend over and over and over again of a counterfeit Christ, a counterfeit salvation, a counterfeit gospel. And that legend is being repackaged all the time because, again, people die, things get judged, things get moved around, and so on. Now, let's read the final bit of this with the Vengmerichts. These dread tribunals, said to have been established by Charlemagne in 772 in Westphalia, had their avowed object the establishment of law and order amidst the unsettled and even anarchic conditions that had reigned in Germany. But by degrees, the power arrogated to itself by the Holy Vem became so formidable that succeeding emperors were unable to control its workings and found themselves forced to become initiates from motives of self-protection. During the 12th century, the Vengmerichts, by their continual executions, had created a veritable Red Terror, so that the east of Germany was known as the Red Land. In 1371, says Le Coteloup de Canteloup, a fresh impetus was given to the Holy Vem by a number of the Knights Templar, who, on the dissolution of their order, had found their way to Germany and now sought admission to the secret tribunals. So they went. You'll see the Knights Templar went to Ireland, Scotland, England, that whole area. They went to Spain, where later you'll see the formation of the Alumbrados, and then later the Jesuits. They went to Germany and they cross-pollinated with there. So it's everywhere that they went. They moved the tradition forward. How much of the Templar lore passed into the hand of the Weimar-Schmitz is impossible to know, but there is certainly a resemblance between the methods of initiation and intimidation employed by the Vems and those described by certain of the Templars, still more between the ceremony of the Vems and the ritual of Freemasonry. Thus, the members of the Vems, known as the Wizened, or Enlightened, keep that in mind, were divided into 3 degrees of initiation: the free judges, the veritable free judges, and the holy judges of the secret tribunal. The candidate for initiation was led blindfold before the dread tribunal, presided over by a Stuhlherr, or master of the chair, or his substitute, a Freigrat, with a sword and a branch of willow at his side. The initiate was then bound by a terrible oath not to reveal the secrets of the Holy Vem, to warn no one of danger threatening them by its decrees, to denounce anyone, whether father, mother, brother, sister, friend, or relation, if such a one had been condemned by the tribunal. Keep this in mind when we get to the Jesuits. After this, he was given the password and grip by which the Confederates recognized each other. Remember the Mithraic, those of the handshake? In the event of his turning traitor or revealing the secrets confided to him, his secrets were bandaged, his eyes were bandaged, and his hands tied behind his back, and his tongue was torn out through the back of his neck. After which he was hanged by the feet till he was dead, with the solemn imprecation that his body should be given as a prey to the birds of the air. It is difficult to believe that the points of resemblance with modern Masonic ritual, which may be discerned, can be a mere matter of coincidence. Yet it would be equally unreasonable to trace the origins of Freemasonry to the Weimarists. Clearly, both derive from a common source, either the old pagan traditions on which the early Vems were founded or the system of the Templars. The latter seems the more probable for 2 reasons. Firstly, on account of the resemblance between the methods of the Vems and the assassins, which would be explained if the Templars formed the connecting link. And secondly, the fact that in contemporary documents, the members of the secret tribunals were frequently referred to under the name of Rosecross, as in Rosicrucians, Rosy Cross. Now, since we have seen the degree of the Rosy Cross is said to have been brought to Europe by the Templars, this would account for the persistence of this with the name in the Weimarists, as well as in the Rosicrucians of the 17th century, who are said to have continued the Templar tradition. Thus, Templarism and Rosicrucianism appear to have been always closely connected, a fact which is not surprising since both derive from a common source, the traditions of the Near East. The mystery religion, Mystery Babylon. This brings us to an alternative theory concerning the channel through which Eastern doctrines, and particularly Kabbalism, found their way into Freemasonry. For it must be admitted that one obstacle to the complete acceptance of the theory of the Templar succession exists, namely, that although the Judaic element cannot be traced further back than the Crusades, neither can it be with certainty pronounced to have come into existence during the 3 centuries that followed after. Indeed, before the publication of Anderson's Constitutions in 1723, there is no definite evidence that the Solomonic legend had been incorporated into the ritual of British Freemasonry. So, although the possession of the legend by the Compagnones, Compagnonages, gosh, I can't pronounce that whatsoever, of the Middle Ages would tend to prove its antiquity, there is always the possibility that it was introduced by some later body of adepts than the Templars. According to the partisans of a further theory, these adepts were the Rosicrucians. Gosh, it's just when you think you're done, there's always some new leapfrog organization. Rosicrucian origin. One of the earliest and most eminent precursors to Freemasonry is said to have been Francis Bacon. There he is. Same guy that put the finishing touches in your KJV Bible. Not that you shouldn't use the KJV, but just don't idolize it. As we have already seen, Bacon is recognized to have been a Rosicrucian, and that the secret philosophical doctrine he professed was closely akin to Freemasonry is clearly apparent in his New Atlantis. The reference to the wise men of the Society of Solomon's House cannot be a mere coincidence. The choice of Atlantis, the legendary island supposed to have been submerged by the Atlantic Ocean in the remote past, i.e., with the flood, would suggest that Bacon had some knowledge of a secret tradition descending from the earliest patriarchs of the human race, whom, like the modern writer Le Plongeon, he imagined to have inhabited the Western Hemisphere, and to have been the predecessors of the Egyptian initiates. Le Plongeon, however, placed this early seat of the mysteries still further west in the Atlantic Ocean in the region of the Maya and the Yucatan. Bacon further relates this tradition was preserved in its pure form by certain of the Jews, who, whilst accepting the Kabbalah, rejected its anti-Christian tendencies. Thus, in the island of Bensalem, there are Jews of far differing disposition from the Jews in other parts. For whereas they hate the name of Christ, and have a secret inbred rancor against the people amongst whom they live, these contrariwise give unto our Savior many high attributes. There you go. They believe Jesus is a great teacher, one of many to them. But at the same time, they believe that Moses, by a secret Kabbalah, ordained the laws of Bensalem, which they now use, and which the Messiah should come and sit on his throne at Jerusalem. The king of Bensalem should sit at his feet, whereas the other kings should keep a great distance. False salvation, counterfeit gospel, counterfeit everything, counterfeit faith. Say they're Jews, but they're not. This passage is of particular interest as showing that Bacon recognized the divergence between the ancient secret tradition descending from Moses and the perverted Jewish Kabbalah of the rabbis. That he was perfectly aware of the tendency even among the best of the Jews to turn the former to the advantage of the messianic dreams. Mrs. Pott, who in her Francis Bacon and His Secret Society sets out to prove that Bacon was the founder of Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry, ignores all of the previous history of the secret tradition. Bacon was not the originator, but the inheritor of the ideas on which both these societies were founded. And the further contention that Bacon was at the same time the author of the greatest dramas in the English language and of the chemical marriage of Christian Rosengrutz is manifestly absurd. Nevertheless, Bacon's influence amongst the Rosicrucians is apparent. Haydn's Voyage to the Land of the Rosicrucians is in fact a mere plagiarism of Bacon's New Atlantis. Mrs. Pott seems to imagine that by proclaiming Bacon to have been the founder or even a member of the Order of Freemasonry, she's revealing a great Masonic secret which Freemasons have conspired to keep dark. But why would the craft desire to disown so illustrious a progenitor or seek to conceal his connection with the order if any such existed? Findel, indeed, frankly admits that the New Atlantis contained unmistakable allusions to Freemasonry, and that Bacon contributed to its final transformation. This was doubtless brought about largely by the English Rosicrucians who followed after. To suggest then that Freemasonry originated with the Rosicrucians is to ignore the previous history of the secret tradition. It gets a lot more nuance, folks, and unless you see the nuance, then you can't see the spiritual patterns behind all of these threads, the web, the dark web that Satan weaves to distract you and to make you say, oh, which one is it, which one? Well, it's not one or the other. It's a spiritual force behind these things. And when you evaluate the fruits of these things and you see this is just like that, then you understand, are they from God or are they from the devil? That's the point of studying history. Rosicrucianism was not the beginning, but a link in the long chain connecting Freemasonry with far earlier secret associations. I agree. The resemblance between the two orders admits of no denial. Thus, Yarker writes, quote, "The symbolic tracing of the Rosicrucians was a square temple approached by 7 steps. Here also we find the 2 pillars of Hermes, the 5-pointed star, the sun and the moon, compasses, square, and triangle." Yarker further observes that even Wren was more or less a student of Hermeticism, and if we had a full list of Freemasons and the Rosicrucians, we should probably be surprised at the numbers who belonged to both systems. Professor Buell emphatically states that Freemasonry is neither more or less than Rosicrucianism as modified by those who transplanted it into England. Chambers, who published his famous Cyclopedia in 1728, observes, quote, "Some who are no friends to Freemasonry make the present flourishing society of Freemasons a branch of Rosicrucians, or rather the Rosicrucians themselves under a new name or relation vis-a-vis as retainers to building. And it is certain there are some Freemasons who have all the characters of Rosicrucians." Peas in a pod. The connection between Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism is, however, a question hardly less controversial than that of the connection between Freemasonry and Templarism. Dr. Mackey violently disputes the theory. The Rosicrucians, he writes, as this brief history indicates, had no connection whatever with the Masonic fraternity. Notwithstanding this fact, Berean, the most malignant of our revilers, with the characteristic spirit of the misrepresentation, attempted to identify the two institutions. But the aforesaid brief history indicates nothing of the kind, and reference to Berean as a malignant reviler for suggesting a connection which, as we have seen, many Freemasons admit, shows on which side this spirit of misrepresentation exists. It is interesting, however, to note that in the eyes of the certain Masonic writers, connection with the Rosicrucians is regarded as highly discreditable. The fraternity would thus appear to have been less blameless than we have been taught to believe. Mr. Waite is equally concerned with proving that there is no traceable connection between Masonry and Rosicrucianism, which, of course, even if you're new to this stuff, you can see that there is. And he goes on to explain that Freemasonry was never a learned society, that it has never laid claim to any transcendental secrets of alchemy and magic or any skill in medicine. Yeah, right. The truth may lie somewhere between the opposing contentions of Professor Buell and his two Masonic antagonists. The Freemasons were clearly, for the reasons given by Mr. Waite, not a mere continuation of the Rosicrucians, but more likely borrowed from the Rosicrucians a part of their system and symbols, which they adapted to their own purpose. Moreover, the incontrovertible fact is that in the list of English Freemasons and Rosicrucians, we find men who belonged to both orders, and amongst those two, who contributed largely to the constitutions of English Freemasonry. Peas in a pod. The first of these is Robert Flood, whom Mr. White describes as the central figure of Rosicrucian literature, an intellectual giant, a man of immense erudition, of exalted mind, and, to judge by his writings, of extreme personal sanctity. Anne Moser describes him as one of the most distinguished disciples of Paracelsus. Yarker adds this clue. In 1630, we find Flood, the chief of the Rosicrucians, using architectural language, and there is proof that his society was divided into degrees. And from the fact that Mason's Company of London had a copy of the Masonic charges presented by Mr. Flood, we may suppose that he was a Freemason before 1620. A still more important link is Elias Ashmole, the antiquary, astrologer, and alchemist, founder of the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford, who was born in 1617. An avowed Rosicrucian, and, as we have seen, also a Freemason, Ashmole displayed great energy in reconstituting the craft. He is said to have perfected its organization, to have added to it further mystic symbols, and according to Ragon, it was he who drew up the ritual of the existing 3 craft degrees, entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason, which was adopted by Grand Lodge 1717. When did these fresh inspirations come but from the Rosicrucians? For as Rogan also informs us, in the year that Ashmole was received into Freemasonry, the Rosicrucians held their meeting in the same room at Mason Hall. How then can it be said that there is no traceable connection between Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism? And why should it be that part of the malignant reviler to connect them? It is not suggested that Rosicrucians such as Flood or Ashmole imported any magical elements into Freemasonry, but simply the system and symbols of the Rose Cross with a certain degree of esoteric learning. That Rosicrucianism forms an important link in the chain of the secret tradition is therefore undeniable. The 7th century rabbis. Almost done. There is, however, a third channel through which the Judaic elements, the legends of Freemasonry, may have penetrated into the craft, namely the rabbis of the 7th century. The Jewish writer Bernard Lazare has declared that, quote, there were Jews around the cradle of Freemasonry, and if this statement is applied to the period preceding the institution of the Grand Lodge in 1717, it certainly finds confirmation in fact. Thus, it is said that in the preceding century, the coat of arms now used by the Grand Lodge had been designed by an Amsterdam Jew, Jacob Jehuda Leon Templo, colleague of Cromwell's friend, the Kabbalist Manasseh ben Israel. To quote Jewish authority on this question, Mr. Lucian Wolff writes that the Templo had a monomania for everything relating to the Temple of Solomon and the Tabernacle of the Wilderness. He constructed gigantic models of both of these edifices. These he exhibited in London, which he visited in 1675, and earlier it seems not unreasonable to conclude that this may have provided a fresh source of inspiration to the Freemasons, who framed the Masonic ritual some 40 years later. At any rate, the Masonic coat of arms still used by Grand Lodge of England is undoubtedly Jewish in design. This coat, says Mr. Lucian Wolff, is entirely composed of Jewish symbols, as an attempt to display heraldically the various forms of the cherubim pictured to us in the second vision of Ezekiel, an ox, a man, a lion, and an eagle, and thus belongs to the highest and most mystical domain of Hebrew symbolism. And of course, these things are designed to point you to the Gospels and to Jesus, but of course they are worshiping in the way of Cain and doing it their own way and taking what God has given and twisting it to create their own religion. So they are the Synagogue of Satan. In other words, this vision known to the Jews as the Merkabah belongs to the Kabbalah, where a particular interpretation is placed on each figure so as to provide an esoteric meaning not perceptible to the uninitiated. The Masonic coat of arms is thus entirely Kabbalistic, as is also the seal of the diplomas of craft masonry, where another Kabbalistic figure, that of a man and a woman combined, is reproduced. As above, so below, male and female integrated, that whole thing. Of the Jewish influence in Masonry after 1717, I shall speak later. To sum it up, then, the origins of the system we know as Freemasonry are not to be found in one source alone. The 12 alternative sources enumerated in the Masonic Encyclopedia and quoted at the beginning of this chapter may have well contributed to its formulation. Thus, operative Masonry may have descended from the Roman Collegia and through the operative Masons of the Middle Ages, whilst speculative Masonry may have derived from the patriarchs and the mysteries of the pagans. But the source of inspiration which admits of no denial is the Jewish Kabbalah. Whether this penetrated to our country through the Roman Collegia, the Compagnones, word I can't pronounce, the Templars, the Rosicrucians, or through the Jews of the 7th and 18th century, whose activities behind the scenes of Freemasonry we shall see later, is all a matter of speculation. The fact remains that when the ritual and the constitutions of Masonry were drawn up in 1717, although certain fragments of the ancient Egyptian and Pythagorean doctrines were retained, the Judaic version of the secret tradition was the one selected by the founder of the Grand Lodge on which to build up their system. Jews who say they are not, but actually are a synagogue of Satan. A synagogue is an institution. It's a building, but it's something that's built, which is interesting. It's an institution. And so these people have created a counterfeit of this Old Testament Levitical religion, that they do things their own way. They're upset. You'll see, we'll go through some pictures of, I think this next one is 2 Faces of Freemasonry. Yeah, you can see it. We're going to look at a couple pictures here. Let's see, VI and VII. This is a big book. It's by John Daniel. It's called Scarlet and the Beast, The 2 Faces of Freemasonry. A lot in here, of course, and some things you have to use discernment on, but nevertheless, a lot of good stuff. And we're going to look at a couple. So like you see, I got my little guide here, VI and VII, so 6 and 7. So this is Scarlet. So remember, there's 2 ways that you can interpret these mysteries. They look Christian or it's anti-Christian. The woke left and the conservative right. MAGA versus the deep state. Same thing, folks. This is the dualistic system. Male and female, opposing factions. Now, the way that he outlines it is that Scarlet is the woman riding the beast, which is basically deistic or pantheistic New Age type masonry, false light. From Merovingian dynasty, Rosicrucianism, English Freemasonry, United Grand Lodge 1717, all this stuff that we talked about, moves into, all these different layers of, I wonder if I can go just a little bit, just so you can see. Yeah, so you see it's right wings, basically right wing, deistic, pantheistic, New Age, upper class, pro-business, capitalist, monopolistic, constitutional monarchy, social, corporate socialism, so on and so forth. So these are the dominates Great Britain, Canada, Northeast USA, Eastern establishment, most Oriental countries, Hong Kong, so on and so forth. Then you have the beast. Now, I'm not saying this is what it is. I'm saying that look at these as spiritual patterns. Spirit of Antichrist, obviously against Christ and in place of Christ as something that looks like a lamb but speaks like a dragon, right? That's the point. Same thing, Merovingian, he ties it all the way to the Merovingian dynasty, the Knights Templar, French Freemasonry, and the various things that happen there, which basically is very left-wing, atheistic, very obviously Antichrist. So, now, the next one I want to show you is on page 4. Let's see, page 4. There's a lot of good pictures in here that are good to reference. So this is the basically the steps of Freemasonry. You have basically 2 sides, and they meet at the top, holding hands and frolicking in Lucifer's backyard. So you have basically the 33 steps of. I wonder if they have a little description here. Masons view the Tower of Babel as a symbol of Masonry's works religion. The tower below contains 33 steps for the Scottish Rite on the left and 13 steps for the York Rite on the right. Both meet at the top. The 3 steps, that's right, because at the top you realize you worship the same God. And that's not the God of the Bible, it's the God of this world. The 3-stepped bases represent the 3 degrees of the Blue Lodge. The arched center contains additional male and female lodges in America. So here's the 3 steps the initiation, like the initial stage. And then after that, you start going into these different ranks. And of course, the higher you go, the more you get initiated until at the top, you're at the top and you realize who you actually worship. But of course, by then you've sold your soul to the devil. Masonic appendages. All Masons in America enter Blue Lodge, which contains 3 degrees, illustrated by the 3 steps at the base of the pyramid. Most Masons never progress beyond the blue degrees. Very important, because they need an external outside that makes the Masonry look like it's just a Christian brotherhood doing Christian things. Looks like Christian, but actually serves the devil. Synagogue of Satan. Those who wish to delve deeper into the mysteries choose either the Scottish Rite, also called the Jewish Rite, of the 30 degrees on the left side of the pyramid, or the York Rite, also called the Christian Rite, of the 10 degrees on the right side of the pyramid, for a total of 33 and 13 degrees respectively. So again, one is obviously Antichrist, the other one is in place of Christ, but they're both counterfeit ways of worship. York Rite is practiced only in the Americas, whereas the Scottish Rite is worldwide. Both are Templar rites. Many Masons in America join both rites. The highest degree a Mason can earn is 32nd Scottish Rite or 13th degree York Rite. Both are equal in prestige. 33rd degree cannot be earned. It is honorary, awarded by the ruling body of Universal Freemasonry, the Supreme Council. At any given time, approximately 5,000 33rd degree Masons are in the world, most of whom hold high positions in their governments. Initially, only 32nd degree Scottish Masons and 13th degree York Masons could join the shrine. Shriners, who operate children's hospitals, take an oath and pray to Allah, the God of Muslims. I talk about this in my Muslim episode with the Shriners. However, since 9/11 terrorist attacks on America by Muslims, Shriner membership has been decimated. To keep their children's hospitals open, Shriners have opened membership to 3rd degree Master Masons. And let's see, what's the next one? 22 and 23. Here's all this other stuff with the entered apprentice, the fellow craftsman. The same legends like the Hiram legend. You got this three people and one of them dying and so on. Here they are shaking hands. The grip of the 3 initiates, and they're building the tower with the eye at the top. And of course, you know whose eye that is. Here's the symbols, all the Egyptian stuff. You can see the third eye in Hinduism. There are swirly little faces this is the checkerboard with the 2 pillars, with the eye at top. The clairvoyant, the eye on your dollar bill. All these things are, in the eye, like ABC. What is this? NBC, I think. CBS. It's all the same symbolism, folks. It's all one giant mystery religion you're part of. Let's see. I think the next one, like I said, was in the 20s. Of course, this talks about all the occult stuff on the dollar bill, which hopefully you're familiar with that by now. National Geographic and all these things that are nothing new under the sun. Of course, there's a prayer room. I think what's this in the United Nations prayer room with the black cube. Do not go in there, and certainly don't pray in there. That's not a place to pray. Freemasonry, Hollis branch, of course. It's got the 2 pillars, the symbols, remember the 5-pointed star, all these things we talked about from the Templars that cross-pollinated. Job's daughters installed new offices at Bethel Lodge. Honored the queen, leads groups in the hymn. Princesses kneel in the form of a pyramid with other officers. This is counterfeit worship, folks. These are counterfeit believers pretending to basically be worshipers of God, but doing it their own way. Synagogue of Satan. It's not just Freemasonry. You have to see, again, the spiritual patterns that are playing out here. The way you get distracted with this is, it's Freemasonry. That's the Synagogue of Satan. It's the Jews. No. Synagogue of Satan is a spiritual paradigm. And that paradigm has been throughout time. And of course, especially in the church age, that's what you're warned of. Because that paradigm is very, very important to understand, because it's a counterfeit of the truth. It's a counterfeit of the true church. Parades itself as a lamb on the outside, but it's actually a dragon on the inside. 22 and 23. Let's see. Where's this at? Because there's a lot of Rosicrucian stuff in here too. And you'll see some pictures of famous leaders and stuff. 22. Yeah, 22. This is like, if you know, the Rotary International. It's led by a Freemason top, Robert C. Fletcher, 13 degree Scottish York Rite Mason. This is, what is this? Masons who either founded were leaders of Masonic 10,000 Freemasons, organizer of Loyal Order of the Moose in 1906, and its officials until 1929. So you have all these orders, like the Rotary Club, the Kiwanis International, all these things are basically regular orders, at least they seem regular, in quote unquote, that these people who are high-ranking Freemasons organize to basically scout for recruits and to basically recruit people. So these orders, all these various, like Knights of Columbus, International Order of the Alhambra, there's so many orders, and it's such a profoundly interconnected thing. Here they are with their little nothing new under the sun, their hats, their various chains and things. The next thing is 26 and 27. Let's see, 26 and 27. This is a Rosecrox table in the shape of a cross. Masons fight with the Pope. Here basically I think this is a Rosicrucian thing. Again, this is what is the cross supposed to be ultimately a symbol of? It's supposed to be a symbol of Christ, and yet you're using it to create this bastardized religion of all sorts of Feast of the Paschal Lamb. Here's a cartoon of the fight with the church, the infighting between these various orders. And of course, Satan started all these things and has to subdue all of them and rein them into one point that he can receive worship through. That's why there's infighting throughout history between these orders, but eventually they come in line. This is cross swords on a Bible indicates Scottish Rite Supreme Council is in sessions. Cross swords on a Bible. Why do they have a Bible when they don't believe in the God of the Bible? The Bible is there to point you to Jesus Christ, to your need for a Savior. You see the Synagogue of Satan coming forward, those who say they are Jews but actually are a synagogue of Satan. They say one thing, they parade one thing, they have the physical trappings of believers, but in fact they are actually serving the agents of Satan. 32 is the next one that I want to show you. Let's see, two faces. Is Masonry a Jewish institution? Ark of the Covenant worship. Revelation 2:9 identifies the persecutors of the church. Christ says, I know the blasphemy of them who say they are Jews and not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Fear not of the things that which you are about to suffer. Look at this, Ark of the Covenant worship, and they're dressed up in these Old Testament, high priestly, clothes with the high priestly, reconstructed, breastplates, and these various robes and initiations. What's going on? What are you people doing? You people have been devoured by the devil, and you have the Ark of the Covenant. But of course, for them, they have these esoteric meanings to these things. So they're doing worship of God their own way, just like throughout all of history. Just like the Israelites built a golden calf to summon God to go before them, they're trying to summon the power of God for themselves. Just like Cain, just like the elders in the book of Ezekiel, just like the Exodus, just like everything, folks. Nothing new under the sun. This is the Synagogue of Satan, but it's not exclusively Freemasonry. That's what I want you to see today. It's not exclusively Freemasonry. 34. Oh yeah, this is all the degrees. Beginning the first millennium, the Eleusinian mysteries of the ancient Greece, from which Freemasonry was patterned, initiates their candidates into becoming a Jew. The scenes and the characters of the mysterious drama as founding the Eleusinian orgies of Greece are, and they give you these various degrees from, just nothing new under the sun. The highest degree is the Jew. Candidate becomes his own God. They say they're Jews, but they're not. Come on. You can't even make this stuff up. Here's, 35? Oh, this is Freemasonry, a satanic order. Does it display satanic symbolism like the rock band? 1980s band Motley Crue, and then of course all the satanic symbolism with them. And you've seen the 5-pointed star, you've seen the 6-pointed star, you've seen all these people like, what's his name? Michael Aquino, he was involved with the CIA. He was dedicated Satanist. Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan. All these people are peas in the pod, folks. This is a letter. What's it say? Anton, former head of the wearing upside down cross. Blah blah blah. Lightning bolt is a symbol of Satan, as in the upside down star. What is this letter? Be it known that having committed to memory and provided sufficient evidence of working knowledge of satanic theology and undivided wisdom, blah, 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 the black arts, Satan degree, I think he's granting something to Michael Aquino. I think this is for Michael Aquino, like a certificate of you're going to hell type of thing. It's straight from Anton LaVey to Michael Aquino. He's the author of the Satanic Bible, that kind of whole thing. This is like some picture of weird ritual they're doing. Just weird stuff, man. This is, there's many ranges of this type of stuff. And of course, there's the obviously Antichrist stuff. And there's the stuff that is very, looks like a lamb type of Antichrist. This is 44. Oh, here we go. 44. We're almost there. Two faces. You have the obviously Antichrist and you have the Light Order Masonry, Sovereign Pontiff of Universal Freemasonry. Albert Pike, look at him, he's like a warlock. He's got this Baphomet cross. And of course, this is still in use today. If you can see, here's the Baphomet cross. Here's the Baphomet cross. These people are worshiping the devil. It's the same symbolism. It's the symbol of Satan. And remember, Baphomet the Templars, the anagram, or whatever the particular linguistic coding that they were using was Baphomet was actually encoding Sophia, which was the divine feminine of wisdom, which of course is still Satan parading around as the opposite of God. God reveals to you himself as masculine. So of course Satan has to reveal himself as the divine feminine. Welcome to this is hilarious. Welcome to the Church of Christ. Sunday 10 a.m., whatever, worship. Here's the pentagram and here's the Freemason sign. Welcome. If this is not the Synagogue of Satan, right here, where it's a counterfeit believers claiming to be the Church of Christ, and then right on top of it, you have a pentagram and a Masonic sign. So tells you everything. 50 and 51. Where are you? 50 and 51. Here's the Washington Monument. Of course, you probably know about this from the top. It's like a point within a circle, which is the monad, which is sun worship, which is also, phallic symbol, if you can deduce what that means. Here's, we'll talk more about this when we get to the USA, but here's the Washington Monument, exactly made to basically have all these satanic symbols. Here's the Masonic House of the Temple right on the line. U.S. Capitol also right on the line. And you have the pentagram of these various streets. This has all been designed. Washington, D.C. is an incredibly satanic place that's been designed with all these runes and capitals and Masonic symbolism. And of course, it's all just under the guise of, city planning, but we know better. 50 and 51. Is this 50 and 51? Yeah, 50. This is, you can see that basically the eight-pointed octagon, and you can see the design of these streets is such as to where these things are, part of their occult symbolism. Even with the Ordo Abcao, with the Fraternal Order of Police, you have all these like sheriff's badges. All the police. This is why, like, again, when you had the Antifa versus the support the blue line, support the police, you really just have two versions of the occult, man. You have the obviously Antichrist one, and then you have people like, oh, we need to support the police, which of course, you got to like not be rebelling to the law and just be openly violent because God has given them authority. They're going to destroy you. But nevertheless, people don't realize that all the police, all the police stations, all the police, what's the word I'm looking for? Police orders, town polices are Fraternal Order of Police. And you can look on their badges, they all have Freemasonic symbols on their badges. This is like a sheriff symbol. Cross behind the jewels, another form of the Templar splayed cross. 3 interlaced triangles represent 3 planes of occult creation in all pagan religions, heaven, earth, and hell, etc., etc. Snake biting its own tail. You have the Ordo Abcao. You can see here, you can barely see it, but you can see the snake. Nothing new under the sun, folks. These things are everywhere. Just look up police badges. You have 2 faces. Eastern religions from which Masonry is patterned have 33 degrees of steps to reach heaven. In the doctrine of reincarnation, the individual is stationed somewhere in between heaven, earth, or hell. When he dies and is reborn, he will either advance in degrees or regress depending upon his good works. So they believe in reincarnation, which of course is the opposite of the truth. You die and that's it. And then you get resurrected and you get judged. If you have the blood of Christ, then you can go free. This is 59. This is what I want to show you. Oh, this is a good one too. This is from the creation of the state of Israel. Where's this? The Palestine, where's the votes? One of these is nation at home, Jewish must become a Jewish state. There's one thing to show you, like the voting that was done to vote for the state of Israel. Where is it? It's one of these. Here it is. Partition approved by more than 2/3, 33 to 13. 33 to 13. 33 voted yes, 13 voted no. So you had 2 opposing sides, and they had to reflect that in the decision that was made. Meaning this is a dualistic decision. It's giving you the illusion that, oh my gosh, they barely made it or whatever. I guess they made it significantly, 33 to 13. But this is just numerology. This is a way for them to say, we are involved in this. You have the dark and the light in creating the state of Israel. This is from Sunday, November 30th, 1947. Partition approved by more than 2/3. State of Israel is born. Now here's Harry Truman. 59. This is Truman with, who is he? With Chaim Weizmann. Truman is holding a Torah, a handwritten scroll of the 5 books of Moses that Wiseman has given to him. Notice the 6-pointed star on the cover of the Torah. That's right. This is not the Star of David. This is the Star of Remphan, as above, so below. And of course, Truman was a 33rd degree Freemason. Chaim Weissman, also Freemason. So on one side, you have a Christian. On the other, you have a Jew, both of them claiming through their own respective forefront religions to be worshiping God. But in fact, they're both 33rd degrees worshiping the devil. Do you see the Synagogue of Satan? This is a perfect example picture. The Synagogue of Satan is not this guy or this guy. The Synagogue of Satan is what this relationship represents. On the surface, they're calling themselves Jews or Christians, i.e., we are God's people. We claim to be with God. On the inside, though, there is an occult, esoteric religion that is controlling them, and they are worshiping the devil. Very clear as though they know exactly what they're doing, because if they're 33rd degrees, they know who they've pledged their life to. So onward and onward, there's a lot more because this is a very long book. But conclusion, hopefully you can see the same patterns repeating throughout history. I know this is a lot of material, but it's important to document one after another so you can see the patterns and how the devil weaves these things together, and how the truth of the Synagogue of Satan is not one thing or another, but rather a spiritual thing. It's a spiritual pattern. It's counterfeit faith, like I keep saying. People act as worshipers of God, but actually are worshiping the devil. You can also see Satan threading every single Antichrist thread into his final throne of the Roman Catholic Church. Through the mystery religions of the East, through the Islam, through the Assassins, through Rabbinic Judaism, everything is coming into the Roman Catholic Church. Mystery schools, Gnosticism, all these things are coming into the Roman Catholic Church. The Templars, who were the focal point of these things and who promulgated them through the world after being dispersed, influenced Freemasonry. It's very clear. I think we've documented that quite a bit. But Templars aren't the only influence. That's why it's important to see beyond specific orders. What I'm trying to show you here is a pattern, because the spiritual thing controlling these things is invisible. And that's what you have to see. The Templars aren't the only influence of Freemasonry. Freemasonry, as it is today, goes back to the Garden of Eden, because it's the mystery religion. But the Templars were a key pivot in that direction, and it's important to see because this will trace the history all the way to the Jesuits, and of course to current events as to what's unfolding and what's coming. That is what matters, to see this invisible snake going through history and doing its thing. Now, some will argue the Templars did not influence Masonry, but this is why seeing a pattern is very important, and why seeing spiritual parentage. Remember all those wordings where they were like, oh, it's a daughter of this and daughter. I was like, wow, man, you really can't make this up. They have to tell you the truth. Behind the workings of all these Antichrist threads is Satan, the spirit of Antichrist, which is simultaneously openly against Christ so that he can introduce himself as the counterfeit Christ and salvation through his counterfeit works and gospel and everything else. The mystery schools, the mystery religions, the esoteric traditions, the legends. By their fruits you will know them, folks. When they're dressing up in high priestly clothes and bowing down to the Ark of the Covenant, or putting a Bible there, or holding a Torah, when in fact, deep down inside, they're worshiping, they've pledged their hearts to the devil. That is the Synagogue of Satan. Now, we still have a few more items to go. Nothing too crazy, but I want to document a few more things just to finish this section up, because we've gone from ancient times all the way to the formation of the Jesuits. Now, the next thing is the Sovereign Military Order of the Knights of Malta, which we'll be coming back to quite a bit. SMOM, known as the Sovereign Military Hospitaller Order of the St. John of Jerusalem or of Rhodes and of Malta, and commonly known as the Order of Malta or the Knights of Malta, is a Catholic lay religious order traditionally of a military, chivalric, and noble nature. Though it possesses no territory, the order is often considered sovereign entity under the international laws. The order claims continuity with the Knights Hospitaller, a chivalric order that was founded about 1099 by the Blessed Gerard in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The order is led by an elected prince and grand master. Where have you heard that title before? Its motto is defense of the faith and assistance to the poor. Remember this first part. Defense of the faith. They are defenders of the Catholic faith. Knights are defenders of a kingdom. And that is their priority. Assistance to the poor is just a front so that they can do the defense of the faith. The order's membership includes about 13,500 knights, dames, and chaplains. 33 of these are professed religious knights of justice. It's an interesting number. Until the 1990s, the highest classes of membership, including officers, required proof of noble lineage. More recently, a path was created for knights and dames of the lowest class, whom proof of aristocratic lineage is not required, to be specially elevated to the highest class, making them eligible for office in the order. The order's modern-day role is largely focused on providing humanitarian assistance and assisting with international humanitarian relations, just like Bill Gates loves to help all those children in Africa with their immunity, for which purpose it has had permanent observer status at the United Nations General Assembly since 1994. That tells you who is in charge. Permanent observer status. The order employs about 52,000 doctors, nurses, auxiliaries, and paramedics, assisted by 95,000 volunteers in more than 120 countries, assisting children, homeless, disabled, elderly, and terminally ill people, refugees, and lepers around the world without distinction of ethnicity or religion. Gosh, they're doing so much good, and certainly God is doing good through them. He's working all things for the good. But we know these things are ruses. Through its Worldwide Relief Corps, Malteser International, the order aids victims of natural disasters, epidemics, and war. In other words, the wars and epidemics and disasters that the beast is creating to make itself seem like the savior. The order maintains diplomatic relations with 113 states, enters into treaties, and issues its own passports, coins, and postage stamps. Its two headquarters buildings are in Rome, enjoy extraterritoriality. Remember this part. That's a very important part. And it maintains embassies in other countries. The three principal officers are counted as citizens, although the order has been a United Nations observer since 1994. This was granted in view of its long-standing dedication in providing humanitarian assistance and a special role in the international humanitarian relations. The same category is held by other non-state entities, such as the International Olympic Committee, also Catholic, and International Committee of the Red Cross, also Catholic. And certainly there's been a lot of stuff on the Red Cross being exposed in these countries where it goes to. Live science. Who were the Knights Hospitaller? The Knights Hospitaller were a humanitarian order of the Holy Warriors during the Crusades who served as inspiration for the Knights Templar. The Knights Hospitaller were the first ones, and then the Templars kind of splintered off from there. The Hospitallers arose from the victory of the First Crusade and the need to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. The Hospitaller Knights were the first of the burgeoning medieval religious orders to receive official papal backing, achieved in 1113. After the fall of the Kingdom of Jerusalem in 1291, the Hospitallers acquired the Greek island of Rhodes as their base and continued operations in the Near East until 1522. In 1530, they established a new base, this time in Malta, and remained there until 1798. Although the Hospitallers splintered and scattered into various groups after this, their legacy is to be found in the present day via such organizations as St. John's Ambulance and the Knights of Malta. Nothing new under the sun. Military Order of Christ is the former Order of the Knights Templar as it was reconstituted in Portugal. Before 1910, it was known as the Royal Military Order of Our Lord Jesus Christ and the Order of Knights of Our Lord Jesus Christ. Jews that say they are Jews but are not. It was founded in 1319 with the protection of the King Denis of Portugal after the Templars were abolished in 22 March 1312 by the papal bull Vox in Excelso and issued by Pope Clement V. Now remember that this was in Portugal. Remember that. King Denis refused to pursue and persecute the former knights as had occurred in most of the other sovereign states under the political influence of the Catholic Church. Heavily swayed by Philip IV of France, Pope Clement had the Knights Templar annihilated through France and most of Europe on charges of heresy. But Denis revived the Templars of Tomar as the Order of Christ, largely for their aid during the Reconquista and in the reconstruction of the Portugal after the wars. Denis negotiated with Clement's successor, John XXII, for recognition of the new order and its right to inherit the Templar assets and property. This was granted in a papal bull ad ea exea cubus on 14th March 1319. So they were back in business. There exists also parallel Supreme Order of Christ, the Holy See, the Order of Christ, the House of Orleans-Braganza, and the Order of Christ of Congo. Here they are with their nice solar symbolism, their decorations, solar crosses. Here's the Knights Templar cross, the 4 equal cross. This is the solar cross. This is pagan, for sure. So, Military Order of Christ was basically reinstated. The Templars were reinstated in Portugal because the king there had an affinity for them, and basically they were helping him out. And then what do you have after that? Well, you have the Alumbrados. The Alumbrados, also called the Illuminated, remember the Wems in Germany, called themselves the Enlightened. Also called the Illuminati, were the practitioners of a mystical form of Christianity in the Crown of Castile during the 15th and 16th centuries. Some Alumbrados were only mildly heterodox, but others held views that were clearly heretical according to the contemporary rulers. Consequently, they were firmly repressed and became some of the early victims of the Spanish Inquisition. Background. Marcelio Méndez y Pelayo found the name as early as 1492 in the form of Illuminados, which means the illuminated ones, in 1498, and traced the group to a Gnostic origin. Would you look at that? He thought their views were promoted in Spain through influences from Italy. I wonder where those influences came from. So there's a lot to read about these, but what is the point? Let's see. Ignatius of Loyola, while studying in Salamanca in 1527, was brought before an ecclesiastical commission on a charge of sympathy with the Alumbrados, but escaped with an admonition. A little pat on the back. Miguel de Molinos was also accused of sympathy owing to some similarities between his book, The Spiritual Guide, and the teachings of the Alumbrados, Isabel de la Cruz and Pedro Ruiz de Alcazar. Very, very interesting. So now we have an uninterrupted chain from the ancient Eastern, rites of the mystery religion, all the way through Rabbinic Judaism, all the way through the Crusaders, all the way through the Templars. They migrated, they dispersed, they went to Freemasonry, they went to this, they went to that. Some of them went to Portugal, and of course, Portugal had the Alumbrados, the illuminated ones, about, 100 years after the Templar order was reinstated. And then those people influenced Ignatius of Loyola, who you will see had his own esoteric experiences of a scintillating serpent and had some very strange ideas. But nevertheless, conclusion, Knights of Malta were the original order during the Crusades. They were Knights of Hospitaller. From these, the Templars basically emerged. The Templars quickly became very corrupt and they splintered off. They were disbanded. They went to different places like we described. And of course, this influenced the development of all of these other leapfrog organizations, Rosicrucians, Freemasonry, Alumbrados, and eventually, of course, the Jesuits. The Knights of Malta continued. They were a parallel organization. They're still around today. And they continue today, and many people, important people, are part of the Knights of Malta. They're Knights of Malta members, political people, people in various positions of power. They're Knights of Malta members. And of course, Knights of Malta are loyal to the Pope. They are defenders of the faith, just like the Jesuits. Knights are defenders of a kingdom. That's what a knight is. They're defenders of the faith. So on the front, it seems like they're doing all of this charitable organizations, just charitable stuff just for the good. And of course, again, God uses everything for the good. Nevertheless, that's a front. That is a front to make them seem ecumenical, to bring people under a common mentality, to spread influence into the world, because all these people are Catholic and they do the bidding of the Pope. And of course, they get into positions of power and so on and so on and so forth. The leader of the Jesuits is a general. And of course, a general means a military situation, not a religious order. So Satan uses these orders and many, many other orders to control politics, religion, finance, health, everything behind the scenes. We'll get back to this in a future section where we look at Satan's hierarchy, Satan's government, and how it's structured and how it's focused in the Catholic Church, but how the Catholic Church ultimately controls all of these things through a hidden secret government of secret societies and all these various orders. Now, very important you understand that these are not the only orders of the Catholic Church. There are countless orders that have proliferated since the Crusades. For example, Order of the Holy Sepulchre, Teutonic Knights, Knights of Santiago. There's many others that I even mentioned while reading these. Countless orders. People love their orders, their secret societies, their memberships, acknowledgement from men instead of acknowledgement from God. So, There are many other secret societies that we touched on, like the Rosicrucians also, the Illuminati, which we'll talk a little bit about in the next section with the Jesuits. All of these things are nothing new under the sun. It's not about saying it's this one or that one, or this one is Synagogue of Satan or whatever. The goal of today is to see the pattern throughout all of history. It's to see the pattern from the very beginning in Eden all the way to Rome and into the current era that is coming upon us with the Great Delusion, where people will marvel after the beast and be part of the Synagogue of Satan. And that synagogue will be very obvious if you have eyes to see. Satan passed the torch of false light from one group to another, to another, to another. And hopefully you can see that now. In the church age, meaning between the first and second advents, he chose to create this final attempt at a new world order through a counterfeit church, and to pass all that information and wealth and power into one centralized authority. And you can see that very clearly through history. God authorized it because ultimately God will be glorified by this particular centralization, because God is the one that's going to come and destroy it. So you will see his power if you're alive to see all of these things. But either way, we'll all be resurrected and we will taste eternity. When he comes and he resurrects us, we'll be in the air and we will be there. We'll finally be there. And all of these things will be conquered, and you will finally have physical fulfillment of everything that you believe, which is a marvelous thought. And you will know, of course, you know that God is sovereign, but you will know that God is sovereign. The physical will catch up with the spiritual, and then it'll be time for the age of joy, because these things will be done away with. Nevertheless, after the cross, again, paganism had to hide behind counterfeit Christianity, which of course is the Synagogue of Satan. It's counterfeit allegiance to God, when in reality you are basically praying and worshiping the devil. Secret societies like Freemasons also say that they're Christian or they're Jewish or whatever else you saw. All these people are from different religions, Muslim, Jew, Christian, doesn't matter. And the background is what really matters, is because they actually pledge their heart to the devil through these various secret societies, which control all of these religions. It's one giant invisible institution. It's one giant invisible web that is interconnected, and that interconnectedness is centralized to the papacy. Again, whether you want to believe that it's the Pope or the Jesuit general or the papal families, it doesn't matter. It's really the devil. And the devil has centralized his government around the Pope so that he can receive worship. And so that means all these secret societies, this invisible hidden hand, this invisible institution, which is the Synagogue of Satan, which is loyal to him, masquerading as a synagogue of God, as an institution of God. That is what is important to see. So, now that we have all of this history of the esoteric thread from the Garden of Eden all the way to the Jesuits, I want to establish another thread, which is crypto-Judaism. Rabbinic Judaism is one of the older threads of the mystery religion. It was one of the first counterfeits of the people of God. And Satan cross-pollinated, as you can see, the Jews with Rabbinic Judaism and Kabbalah into the Roman Catholic Church through the Templars, which influenced secret societies and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of crossover there because, again, Satan does not waste any of his threads. Whatever deception he creates, he's going to use it and thread it into somewhere else. He's not going to waste his efforts. Rabbinic Judaism was the original counterfeit of the spiritual Israel. It was a counterfeit of the Levitical religion, which was designed to point you to Christ. After the first temple was destroyed, rabbinic schools and synagogues were started to educate people in the Torah. This was in Babylon, of course, so the Jews there eventually got tainted with the mysteries and the occult and astronomy or astrology and so on. Probably it was earlier because of the apostasies like weeping for Tammuz and worshiping Baal and all the things we covered, but nevertheless, the rabbis claim the oral tradition of the Kabbalah goes back to the Garden of Eden, which we know. We know that that's true to some degree. Maybe not the way they say it, but we know that spiritually, that's as old as time. After 70 AD, Rabbinic Judaism officially established itself on 3 pillars: charity, prayer, and, good works, I think is the third one. Something like that. One of those I'm getting wrong, but either way, it's the 3 pillars of Judaism, which of course is nonsense because you need blood in order to have forgiveness of sins. And of course, your blood it's either your blood or Christ's blood. So one of the two. What the point is here is, though, that the Jews are very obviously Antichrist, yet they claim to be worshipers of God. The Roman Catholic Church claims to be Christian, yet the Bible tells you it's the throne of Satan. The Jews were God's people in the Old Testament, and Satan counterfeited that into the rabbinic system, rabbinic Judaism. Christians are God's people in the New Testament. Satan counterfeited that into Roman Catholicism. Both of these groups have been cross-pollinated with each other because Satan has to integrate them into one system. And of course, that system is Catholic. It's not Jewish. That's the important point. Both are part of the Synagogue of Satan, the hidden institution that's of counterfeit faith. So we want to see the relationship between these two systems. We want to see that it's much more bigger, expansive, much more important, and much more spiritual than just something is like, some people believe, for example, that the Catholic Church is really just run by Pharisees, and it's actually Jewish. And it's a lot more complicated than that, folks. It's much more nuanced. The spiritual thing behind this is one spiritual anti-gospel that goes way back to Eden, that you can save yourself through good works, that you can approach God and take advantage of God's benefits through your own way, not the way that he says. That's the tree of knowledge. That is what's spiritually guiding all of these things, whether it's Freemasonry, Judaism, Roman Catholicism. And you need to see that spiritual hand behind these three things and not get caught up in the three flavors or other flavors, because it's all the same stuff. And when you see it spiritually like that, then that gives you discernment for what's coming and to be able to interpret the news. And you can see the harlotry, you can see the patterns, you can see the spirit guiding people like Trump and MAGA and, all the revivals that are happening, supposedly quote unquote revivals, mass baptisms, and so on and so forth. So either way, now that we've established a pretty thorough history of how we've gotten from Eden all the way to the Jesuits, which we will cover in the next section after this coming one, I want to look at the beast and the Jews. So onward to part 3.